Lena Holt had flour on her hands, and a bruise on her wrist that she had not told anyone about, because there was no one to tell. She stood behind the wooden counter of the bakery at 5 in the morning, the way she stood there every morning, and she shaped the dough with the kind of focus that comes from having nothing else to think about. The town of Grayfield was quiet at this hour. The mountains outside the window were dark against a darker sky. The bakery smelled like warm bread and cinnamon, and if someone had walked in right then and looked at her, they might have thought she looked peaceful. She was not peaceful. She was counting. Lena had been counting for a long time. Not money, though she counted that too, carefully, because there was never quite enough of it. What she counted were days. Specifically, she counted the days since the last time someone had made her feel like something left on the side of a road. The current count was 4. 4 days of nothing. 4 days of being allowed to simply exist without incident. She knew better than to trust 4 days. 4 days was nothing. 4 days was just the gap before the next thing. She was 19 years old, and she had learned this very early. The bell above the bakery door had not worked for 3 months. The owner, old Mr. Peel, had been meaning to fix it since October, and it was now January, so it remained broken, which meant that when the door opened at 5:14 in the morning, Lena did not hear it. She only noticed because the draft came in and lifted a dusting of flour off the counter in a small pale cloud, and she looked up. It was Clara Briggs, who worked at the post office and sometimes stopped in for an early roll before her shift. Clara was 40-something, and kind in the way that very tired people are kind, which is to say she meant well and did not have the energy to mean anything worse. She nodded at Lena. Lena nodded back. Clara pointed at the rolls in the glass case. Lena held up 2 fingers. A question. Clara nodded. Lena bagged 2 rolls, took the coins, made change, and the whole transaction happened in under a minute, without a single word from Lena, because Lena did not speak. She had not spoken since she was 11 years old. It was not a choice, not exactly. When she was 11, she had a fever that lasted 9 days, the kind of fever that made the walls melt and the ceiling breathe, and the people at her bedside look like strangers, wearing familiar faces. When the fever broke, her voice did not come back with it. The doctors used long words. Her mother had sat very still in the plastic hospital chair and nodded at the long words with the expression of someone receiving news they had already, on some level, been expecting. Lena had watched her mother nod and understood, even at 11, that her mother was not surprised. That somehow, losing her voice was just the next thing in a life that had already been decided to go a certain way. She had a notebook. She had always had a notebook, even before the fever, because she had been the kind of child who wrote things down. After the fever, the notebook became her voice. She went through several a year. The current one was green, with a small ink stain on the cover that looked, if you tilted it slightly, like a running dog. She kept it in the front pocket of her apron. She kept a pen clipped to the top. She was not shy. People often assume she was shy, the way people assume that someone who does not speak must have nothing to say. Lena had a great deal to say. She simply could not say it out loud, and she had learned, by the time she was 13, that most people were not interested in waiting for her to write it down. So she wrote the important things and kept the rest for herself, and the rest was quite a lot. Clara left with her rolls. The door swung shut. The draft died. Lena went back to her dough. By 6, 3 more customers had come and gone. By 7, the bread was in the case, and the pastries were arranged, and the coffee urn was running, and Lena had eaten half a bun standing at the back sink, because she had forgotten to eat before her shift, and her stomach had started making its feelings known. By 8, the morning crowd was beginning, which in Grayfield meant 7 or 8 people, not a rush by any standard, but enough to keep her hands busy. She liked keeping her hands busy. The thing about having no voice was that your hands became very important. Her hands were always in motion, shaping, folding, pointing, writing, gesturing. She had developed a shorthand with the regulars over the 2 years she had worked at the bakery. A raised eyebrow meant the usual. A flat palm meant sold out. A tilt of the head toward the chalkboard meant, look at the specials. Most of the regulars had learned it the way you learn any language that you hear enough, which is to say slowly, and then all at once. Not everyone bothered to learn it. At 8:22, the door opened and 3 women walked in. They were all around 20, 21, dressed well in the way that people dress well in small towns, which means better than everyone else by a very specific and calculated margin. The one in front was Mara Voss. She was tall, with pale hair, and a smile that she used the way some people use an elbow, to move things out of her way. Lena's hands went still on the counter. She did not let them see that. She relaxed them deliberately, reaching for a cloth, wiping the counter surface in a slow, even motion. She kept her face neutral. This was something she had practiced, to the point where it required almost no effort anymore. Her face simply went to its resting position, which was calm, and she stayed there. Mara walked to the case and looked at the pastries with the expression of someone who had never once worried about money in her life. 2 of those, she said, pointing at the almond tarts. She did not say please. She had never once said please to Lena, and a large coffee. Lena nodded. She reached for the tongs. One of the women behind Mara, a girl with red hair named Caitlin, said something under her breath. The third woman laughed, quickly, a sharp little sound she covered with her hand. Lena did not look up. She placed the tarts in the bag with the same care she used for every order, and poured the coffee and set the cup on the counter, and wrote the total on the small notepad she kept beside the register. Mara looked at it. She reached into her bag and put the money on the counter, not in Lena's hand. She never put money in Lena's hand. She always placed it on the counter, as though physical contact was something she was protecting herself from. Lena picked up the money and made change. She held the change out. Mara took it from the counter after Lena set it down. "You have something on your cheek," Mara said. She was already turning away. "Flour. It's a lot." Caitlin laughed again. The 3 of them moved toward the small table by the window, the one Lena liked least because she could always see it from the counter. They sat and opened the bag and talked among themselves as though the bakery were a room in their house. Lena touched her cheek. There was flour there. There was always flour somewhere. She wiped it with the back of her hand and went back to the register. She did not feel embarrassed. She had trained that out of herself carefully, over years. Embarrassment required caring about what the other person thought of you, and Lena had stopped caring what Mara Voss thought of her on a specific Wednesday 3 years ago, the details of which she had written down in a different notebook, the one she did not keep in her apron, the one she kept at home, in the space behind the loose board under her bed. She called it, in her own head, the record. The record had started as something she did, because she needed to put the things somewhere outside her own mind, somewhere they could sit on a page and stop taking up space inside her. But it had grown into something more specific than that. It was a log. Date, time, location, names, what happened, who witnessed it. She wrote it the way you would write something you intended to show someone someday. She did not know who that someone would be, or when someday would arrive. But she wrote it that way anyway, because the habit of being precise felt important, even when precision did not seem to matter to anyone but her. 7 years of Mara Voss was a lot of pages. It had started when Lena was 12, the year after the fever, when she arrived at Grayfield Middle School with her notebook and her silence and her mother's hand-me-down jacket, and immediately became the thing that groups of children will always find and circle, the one who cannot fight back in the usual way. Children are very sensitive to structural advantage. They can identify it before they can name it. Lena could not shout. She could not call back. She could not defend herself with volume or with fast words, and fast words were the primary currency of cruelty at that age. Mara had been 13 then, already polished in the way that certain people are polished young, when someone has smoothed and shaped them very deliberately. Her father was the head of the Voss family, which in Grayfield meant something. The Voss family had been the dominant alpha family in the region for 3 generations. Their name was on the hospital wing and the secondary school library and the sign outside the town hall. They owned land, and they owned loyalty, and they owned, in various quiet ways, the social architecture of Grayfield, the way you own a house, which is to say completely, and with the right to make changes whenever they liked. Mara had understood from a very young age that she was at the top of something. She had understood, also, that maintaining the top required regular demonstration of the fact, and Lena, small and silent and low-ranked by the biological designation that this world attached to people like her, was a very easy demonstration. The things that happened in middle school were the kind of things that people later called ordinary cruelty, as though ordinary made it smaller. Notebooks taken, things written in them that were not hers. Her place at lunch tables removed, not loudly but consistently, in the way you remove something without touching it, by simply making clear it was never welcome there. Whispers that she was not meant to hear, but that were calibrated very precisely so she would hear them anyway. Lena documented all of it. High school was more of the same, with more resources. Mara had friends now, a group of them, and a phone, and social pages where things could be said about people without technically saying them, in the way that platforms allow. Lena was not on any of those platforms. She had tried once, at 15, and lasted 11 days before she closed the account. The internet was an amplifier, and it did not discriminate between what it amplified. She had not expected high school to be kind. She had expected it to be survivable, and it was, and she survived it. What she had not expected was that after high school, after she had managed to age out of the usual machinery of that particular cruelty, Mara Voss would continue. That adulthood would simply give the cruelty better tools. Mara's father had died 2 years ago, leaving the family estate and the family businesses and the family name to Mara and her older brother, who had not been in Greyfield for years. Mara had stepped into the family's social position, with the confidence of someone who had been rehearsing for it her whole life. She joined the boards. She organized the events. She smiled at the right people and ignored the wrong ones, and the people of Greyfield, who had been arranged around the Voss name for 3 generations, continued to arrange themselves. And Lena continued to be Lena, which meant she continued to be an easy target, and Mara continued to find that useful. The bruise on Lena's wrist, the one she had not told anyone about, was from last Thursday. She had been carrying a delivery box up the narrow staircase of the building next to the bakery, where Mr. Peel also stored his dry goods. She had been tired. She had not seen Caitlin coming down the stairs at the same time until they were almost at the same step, and Caitlin had startled, or had seemed to startle, and had knocked the box from Lena's hands, and the box had caught Lena's wrist on the way down. It had hurt. It still hurt, 5 days later, a low, steady ache that she was aware of every time she shaped dough. She did not write Caitlin's name in the record for that one. It might have been an accident. Lena had always tried to be fair. By 9:30, Mara and her friends were gone. The bakery filled and emptied in its usual rhythm. The morning crowd thinned. The mid-morning lull settled in. Lena swept the floor behind the counter and replenished the case and washed 3 mixing bowls and thought about nothing in particular, which was the closest she came to rest. She thought, sometimes, about what her life looked like from the outside. She thought about this not from self-pity, but from the same kind of precision that drove the record. If she could see herself clearly, she could understand her situation clearly, and understanding it clearly was the only way she had ever found to manage it. From the outside, she was a 19-year-old Omega woman in a small mountain town, working a bakery job for wages that covered her rent and her food and nothing else. She lived alone, in a 1-room apartment above a hardware store 3 blocks from the bakery, a space that was small and clean and entirely hers, which was the thing she valued most about it. She had no family in Greyfield. Her mother had moved to the coast when Lena was 16, a decision that had been framed as temporary and had become permanent in the way that many temporary things do, by the gradual absence of any plan to reverse it. She had an aunt somewhere in the north, a woman she had met twice. She had no close friends, not because she was incapable of friendship, but because friendship in Greyfield came with a social tax that she could not afford to pay. To have a friend here meant being part of something. Every group she had ever been adjacent to had, eventually, made clear that her presence made them a target, or made them uncomfortable, or simply was not worth the complications her silence, and her ranking, and her history with the Voss family created. It was never said directly. It was always just a slow withdrawal, a cooling, a drifting. She had stopped pursuing it somewhere around 17. She had the bakery. She had her notebooks. She had the mountains, which she walked on her days off, alone, up the trails that wound behind the town, where nobody went in January because nobody in Greyfield liked the cold, except her. She liked it. The cold was very honest. It did not pretend. At 10 o'clock, she was restocking the display case when she heard footsteps on the sidewalk outside, fast ones, and then the door swung open, in the way that doors swing open when the person pushing them has somewhere to be, and she looked up expecting another regular. She did not recognize the man who walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat that was too light for January in the mountains. He was moving with the particular energy of someone who has been on the road for a long time and is running on the last reserves of it. that specific mix of exhaustion and forward momentum that makes people look both present and slightly elsewhere. He stopped just inside the door and looked around the bakery, the way people look around a place when they are deciding if it is what they need right now. His eyes landed on the coffee urn. He crossed to the counter. He was somewhere around 30, she guessed. Dark hair. A jaw that looked like it had been arranged by someone with definite opinions about symmetry. He had the kind of face that people notice, and then try to act like they did not notice. And Lena, who was very practiced at observing without appearing to observe, noted all of this in about 4 seconds, and returned her attention to the pastry case. "Large coffee," he said. "Whatever you have. It doesn't matter." She nodded. She poured it. She held up the small chalkboard with the prices. He looked at it. He looked at her. He reached into his coat pocket and put money on the counter without looking at how much it was, clearly without caring. He picked up the coffee with both hands and took a long drink, standing right there at the counter, and his eyes closed for about 2 seconds. "Thank you," he said. He said it like he meant it. She nodded again. He did not leave. He stood at the counter and drank the coffee and looked out the window at the main street of Grayfield in January, which was gray and mostly empty. She moved quietly, restocking, not watching him. She had long since developed the ability to be in a room with someone without either engaging or retreating, a kind of neutral presence that she had found most people found easy to be around, even if they could not have explained why. After a while he said, not to her, not really to anyone, just in the way people say things when they're tired and the coffee is starting to work, "I forgot how small this place is." She did not respond, obviously, but she glanced at him briefly, and he caught it, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Exactly. More like reorientation. He looked at her more carefully for a moment. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't expecting a response. I'm just talking to myself." She held up a hand briefly. "Fine. It doesn't matter." He looked at the hand. He looked at the notebook in her apron pocket. Something connected, quietly, behind his eyes. He did not make a face about it. He did not do the thing that many people did, which was to suddenly become very gentle and careful, in an elaborate and exhausting way, as though her silence were a physical injury they were afraid of aggravating. He just nodded, once, and went back to his coffee. She found that she appreciated that. He paid, left a small amount extra that was not quite enough to be considered a tip but was clearly intentional, and walked back out into the January cold. She watched him go through the window. He turned left up the main street and walked without looking back. She stood behind the counter for a moment, with a pastry tong in one hand and nothing particular in her head, which was unusual. Then she went back to work. She did not know his name. She did not know, yet, that his last name was the same as the last name on the hospital wing, and the school library, and the town hall sign. She did not know that he had arrived in Grayfield the night before, alone, driving a road that had been dark and icy for the last 60 kilometers, to deal with an inheritance he had not wanted, and a family situation he had been avoiding for 3 years. She did not know any of that. What she knew was that it was 10:15, and she had bread to shape, and the almond paste needed to be prepped before noon, and there were 4 more hours in her shift. She rolled her sleeves up, careful of the bruise on her wrist, and went back to the dough. The mountains outside the window were catching the morning light now, going from gray to gold at their edges, the way they did every clear morning in January, and Lena did not have time to look at them, but she glanced once, the way she always did, because even a glance was something. She had been making do with glances for a very long time. 4 days, she thought, and then whatever comes next. She kept her hands moving. The man came back the next morning. Lena noticed because she noticed everything that happened in the bakery, the way a person notices everything in a space they have occupied for long enough that they have memorized its rhythms. She knew which floorboard near the door made a sound when someone stepped on it. She knew which of the windows let in a draft if the wind came from the north. She knew that the second stool at the counter wobbled slightly if you shifted your weight to the left, and she had been meaning to fix it for 6 months, and had not yet found a moment when it was not easier to simply remember not to sit on it. She knew, from the way the door opened, whether the person coming in was a regular or not. Regulars had a certain ease about the door, a familiarity. Strangers pushed it slightly too hard, or slightly too slow, one or the other, because the door had a specific weight to it that you only learned through repetition. He pushed it slightly too hard, but less so than yesterday. He was already learning the door. She was behind the counter, piping cream into small pastry shells, which was the kind of task that required steady hands and did not require looking up, which was how she was watching him in her peripheral vision while appearing to pay attention to something else. He was wearing the same dark coat, still too light for January, and he had gotten more sleep, she thought. The particular bleached quality of his face from yesterday was gone. He moved more deliberately now, less like someone running on fumes. He came to the counter. He looked at the board of specials. Then he looked at the case. Then he looked at her. "Can I get the same coffee? And one of those?" He pointed at the pastry shells she was working on, the cream ones, if they're ready. She had 2 finished ones in the case. She held up 2 fingers, asking. He nodded. She plated both, poured the coffee, wrote the total on the notepad. He paid without looking at the total. She was starting to understand this was a habit of his, this carelessness with small amounts, and she placed it beside other observations about him, in the way she placed things, not to form a judgment, but to form a picture. Observations were just information. Information was never bad to have. He sat at the counter this time, on the stool that did not wobble, because of course he chose that one, and ate the pastries slowly, and drank the coffee without looking at his phone, which was unusual for someone his age. Most people his age ate and drank while looking at a screen. He looked at the bakery. He looked at the street outside. He looked, once, at the small ink painting of the mountains that Mr. Peel had hung on the wall behind the register 20 years ago, and that Lena had never paid much attention to, but which she now saw, through the angle of his gaze, was actually quite good. She kept piping cream into shells. At some point he said, "Do you know if there's anyone still working at the land registry office, on Elm Street?" She stopped. She reached for her notebook. She wrote, "Closed 3 years ago. County office is in Millhaven, 40 minutes east." She turned the notebook around on the counter. He read it. He did not look surprised that she had written it, and he did not look surprised by the information. He just nodded, the same nod from yesterday, once, that said received. She turned the notebook back. "That's going to make things slower," he said, not complaining, just stating, "Thank you." She continued piping. He finished his coffee and his pastries and left, and the bakery went back to its usual self, and the morning rolled forward in the way it always did, and Lena thought about him for about 30 seconds between one task and the next, in the way you think about something briefly before it slips under the day. Then she stopped thinking about him. He came back on the 3rd day, and the 4th, and by the 4th day he had learned the door properly, and by then 2 of the other regulars had noticed him. Clara Briggs had said something to him on day 3, the usual small-town interrogation, delivered in the nicest possible way, and he had answered it civilly and without much detail, and Clara had seemed satisfied by this, and said to Lena afterward, in the tone of someone sharing interesting news, "He's a Voss. The older brother, Calum. He's been gone years." Lena had nodded in the way that means "thank you for telling me," and does not mean anything else. She had filed the information. Calum Voss. The name was on the inheritance then. She had heard, when old Mr. Voss died, that there was an older son who had left Greyfield at 21 and built something elsewhere, and that the family estate was complicated, and that Mara was managing it, but that the son would have to return eventually to sign things. She had not thought much about it at the time. It had not been relevant to anything in her life. She adjusted the picture slightly. The carelessness with small amounts of money made more sense now. The too light coat in January made less sense, but people who grew up in cold places sometimes stopped registering the cold after enough time elsewhere. The way he looked at Greyfield through the window like something he was trying to remember and half succeeded. On the 5th day, he brought a folder of papers and spread them on the counter beside his coffee, and worked through them while she did prep for the afternoon batch. She did not look at the papers. It was not her business. But she was aware of him in the way you are aware of someone when they have been in a space long enough to become part of its texture. At some point he made a sound that was not quite a word, more like the sound a person makes when they find something in a document that is worse than they expected. She did not look up. Then she heard him shuffle the papers back into the folder, and when she did glance over, his face had the specific expression of someone who has decided to deal with something later. He looked up and caught her glancing. She did not look away. She had long since stopped the instinct to look away, when caught looking. It was a habit of apology, looking away, and she had removed it from herself with care. He said, "How long have you worked here?" She held up 2 fingers. 2 years? She nodded. He looked at the bakery. "Mr. Peel still owns it?" She nodded. "He taught my father to fish," he said, which was a strange thing to say, but people said strange things when they were working through something difficult and needed to talk about something easy instead. "Badly, apparently. My father never caught anything." She picked up her notebook and wrote, "He taught me to make bread. Also badly. I had to relearn it from a book." He read it and laughed. An actual laugh, short, which startled both of them slightly. She had not meant it to be funny. Or rather, she had meant it in the mild way things can be both true and slightly funny at the same time, but she had not expected it to land that quickly. She was unused to landing things quickly. Communication through the notebook was good for information, and for necessity, but it was slow, and slow things rarely landed in the same way. The gap between thought and pen and paper and reading was long enough that the moment usually moved past by the time you got there. She looked at him with mild curiosity. He looked at her with something she couldn't quite categorize. Not pity. Not the careful gentleness. Something closer to interest, the kind that does not want anything from you, the kind that simply finds you interesting in the way that certain things are interesting, the way a well-made object is interesting, a thing that clearly required effort and skill and time. She was not used to that either. He left soon after. She went back to her work. On day 7, which was a Thursday, Lena was in the storage room at the back, going through an inventory list that Mr. Peel had left for her, when she heard the bell above the door, that was not supposed to ring, because it was broken, ring. She frowned. Then she heard voices, and recognized both of them, and went very still in the storage room. Mara Voss, talking to someone on her phone, voice carrying the way it always did, as though the acoustics of every room had been arranged for her convenience. And then the voices of Caitlin and another girl Lena knew by sight, a woman named Fiona who worked at the property office and who was part of Mara's orbit without quite being its center. Lena stayed where she was. She did not need to go back to the counter yet. She stood among the shelving units holding the inventory clipboard and listened to the sound of Mara ordering for herself and the others, talking over the top of the transaction to whoever was on her phone, not directing a single word at whoever was behind the counter, which today was Mr. Peel's nephew, a 16-year-old boy named Owen, who filled in on Thursdays. She heard Owen's quiet responses. She heard the sound of the register. She heard Mara say, still into her phone, something that she did not hear clearly, and then she heard Caitlin laugh, and then she heard her own name, which she recognized by the particular silence that always followed it in rooms like this, the silence of people listening to hear if she had heard. She had heard. She wrote nothing. She stood in the storage room and finished the inventory. After they left, she went back to the counter. Owen was restacking napkins with the look of a boy who had just experienced something mildly unpleasant and was trying very hard to seem unbothered. She caught his eye. He looked away. She tapped the counter to get his attention back and wrote on her notepad, "You okay?" He shrugged. "Yeah, fine." She wrote, "You don't have to be fine." He looked at the note. He looked at her. Then he said, very quietly, "She said some stuff about you." I didn't say anything back. I should have said something." She shook her head. She wrote, "You're 16. It's not your job." He nodded. He still looked uncomfortable. The discomfort of someone who had watched something happen and had not found a way to stop it. She knew that discomfort. She had been watching it on other people's faces for years. The ones who saw it and did nothing were not the same as the ones who did it, but they existed in a category of their own, a category she had thought about a great deal and tried not to be too hard about, because being hard about everything was exhausting and she had limited energy. She gave Owen a pastry from the case, a good one, with raspberries, and he took it and seemed to feel slightly better. That evening, in her apartment, she sat at the table with the second notebook, the one from under the bed, and wrote. She wrote the date and the time, and what she had heard, or the portion she had heard. She wrote it precisely, in the format she had used for 7 years, and then she closed the notebook and put it back. She looked at the ceiling for a while. She was not sad, exactly. Sadness had a softness to it, a wet quality, and what she felt was something drier and harder. Something like the way a stone feels when you pick it up from a riverbed. Cold, worn smooth, durable. She was tired in the specific way that comes not from lack of sleep, but from the sustained effort of being a person in a world that has consistently made being a person in it more difficult than it needed to be. She was tired in the bones. She made herself tea. She sat at the window and looked at the street below, which was empty at this hour, the hardware store's sign casting a small pool of yellow light on the pavement. She had sat at this window many evenings and looked at this exact pool of light. It was not much to look at, but it was hers. She thought, very briefly, about Calum Voss, not in the way that you think about someone you are interested in, but in the way that you think about something new, in a landscape that has been unchanged for a long time. A new thing, not necessarily a good one, not necessarily a bad one, just new. His sister had just spent 20 minutes in his family's territory, using his family's name as a kind of social permission to do what she always did. He had sat at the counter of the same bakery every morning this week, and drunk his coffee, and read his papers, and treated her like a person who worked there. She did not know what that meant. She did not know if it meant anything. She was, above all things, careful about what she decided things meant. She finished her tea. She washed the cup and went to bed. She thought of the laugh. Short, surprised, real. She had not made many people laugh in her life, or not in the way she intended. The notebook was slow and jokes required timing, and timing required speed. But she had made him laugh, and it had been quick, and she was not sure what to do with that. She decided to do nothing with it. She went to sleep. The morning came at 4:30, the way it always did, and she rose and washed her face and put on her apron, and walked 3 blocks in the January dark to the bakery, and opened it alone, the way she always opened it, with her key and her notebook and her 2 hands. The mountains were invisible in the dark. She could not see them, but she knew where they were, the way you know where something is when you have looked at it long enough. She turned the lights on. She started the ovens. She began. 3 weeks into Calum Voss returning to Greyfield, Lena had developed a fairly accurate picture of him from the pieces that came across the counter of the bakery every morning. Not a full picture. Not even a picture she had any interest in completing. Just the pieces that gathered naturally when you spent an hour in proximity to someone daily, without any of the usual social scaffolding to distract you. He did not talk to fill silence. She appreciated this more than she could write in a notebook. Most people, when confronted with her silence, rushed to fill it with their own words, as though silence were a hole they were personally responsible for covering over. He treated silence the way she treated it, as the default state of things, from which sound could be subtracted or added depending on whether it was useful. He was quiet the way working people are quiet, people who have learned that noise and productivity are not the same thing. He was dealing with something that was more than just an estate. She could tell because of the folder that sometimes came with him, and the way the folder got thicker over days before thinning again, and the expressions that crossed his face when he read whatever was in it, expressions that were carefully managed but not perfectly managed. She had become very good at reading the small gaps in managed expressions, the way you read weather between clouds. On a Tuesday in the 3rd week, he came in later than usual, closer to 9 than 7, and he sat at the counter and ordered and then said, without much preamble, "Is there anyone in this town who handles property disputes who isn't already in the Voss family's pocket?" She looked at him. He seemed to realize what he had said and what he had said it to, and his expression shifted slightly. Not embarrassed, exactly. More like recalibrating. "Sorry," he said. That was out of line. You don't need to answer that." She had already picked up her notebook. She wrote, "Depends on the dispute. What kind?" He looked at the question. He looked at her. He seemed to be deciding something, and she was aware of the decision happening, but she did not push. She had written the question, and she would either get an answer or not, and both outcomes were fine. He said, "Someone transferred a section of property that wasn't theirs to transfer, quietly, before I got back. And whoever they used to do it is someone I'd rather not use to undo it, for obvious reasons." She wrote, "Ida McAllister. She's a retired solicitor that lives on Croft Lane. She doesn't work for anyone local." He read it. He said, "How do you know that?" She wrote, "She comes in every Friday for the cheese rolls. She told me she retired here from the city, because she was tired of the city. She does occasional consultations for people who specifically don't want local. She gave me her card. She turned to the small corkboard beside the register where Mr. Peel pinned business cards and takeaway menus and other miscellany, and she unpinned a card from the lower corner and placed it on the counter. He picked it up. He read it. He put it in his pocket. He said, "Thank you, genuinely." She nodded. He finished his coffee without saying anything else, but the silence was different from usual. It had a quality to it, a kind of settled something, the kind that comes when two people have exchanged something real and both know it, and neither needs to comment on the fact. He left. She pinned a new card from the stack in the drawer into the space on the corkboard. She did not think much about the property dispute. It was his business. She had information that was useful, and she had offered it the way she always offered information when she had it, because information was one of the few things she was in a position to give, and it cost nothing to give it. What she thought about, briefly, was the phrase in the Voss family's pocket. He knew. He knew that the town was arranged around his family's name. He knew it from the outside, from whatever perspective he had built for himself in the years away. He looked at Greyfield the way someone looks at a thing they were once inside, and can now see the shape of. She wondered what it looked like from there. She wondered, and then she put the wondering away, because wondering about the internal landscape of Calum Voss was not a productive use of her energy, and productive use of her energy was one of the primary principles she had organized her life around. She went back to the prep table and started on the Friday batch of cheese rolls, which needed to be ready by 8 because Ida McAllister was one of the most punctual people who came into the bakery, and Lena had never once had to apologize to her for running late. She worked steadily. She kept her hands moving. She did not look at the door. Outside, January was becoming February, which in the mountains meant that the snow that had been threatening for weeks was now beginning to make good on its threats, coming down in the late afternoons, in long, slow curtains that softened the edges of everything and made the town look, from the bakery window, like a version of itself, drawn from memory by someone who loved it more than it perhaps deserved. Lena watched the snow sometimes, in the quiet between tasks. She watched it the way she watched the mountains and the pool of light from the hardware store sign, as something that was simply there, and was hers to look at, and asked nothing from her in return. It was enough. She had built a life around enough. She just didn't always know, at 4 in the morning with flour on her hands and a bruise going yellow on her wrist, whether enough was a destination or just a place you kept moving through on the way to something she hadn't figured out the name of yet. She shaped the rolls. She slid them into the oven. She set the timer. She waited. The collision happened on a Tuesday. Not a metaphorical collision. An actual one. Lena was coming around the corner from the alley beside the bakery, carrying an empty crate back from the delivery door, walking with purpose, the way she always walked, because she had never had the luxury of walking without purpose. And Calum Voss was coming the other direction, around the same corner, at the same speed. And the crate went first, because crates always go first, and then her notebook went, because her notebook was always the second thing to go, and then her pen rolled under the lip of the building and stopped in a crack in the pavement. She did not fall. She had good balance from years of carrying things. She caught the wall with one hand and stayed upright. He had caught the crate. He was holding it at an angle, looking at it, then at her. The quick recalibration of someone checking that everyone was intact before saying anything. "Are you all right?" She nodded. She was looking at her notebook on the pavement. He followed her gaze, bent, and picked it up. And here was the thing. The notebook had fallen open. It had fallen open to a page she had been writing on that morning, during the quiet between the first rush and the second. And what was on the page was not anything dangerous. It was just her thoughts, which was worse, in a way, because her thoughts were private, in a way that information was not. She had written about the snow, about the way the light hit the street at 7 in the morning, about whether Mr. Peel was going to raise the rent when the lease renewed in March, and about a dream she had had, which she could not now remember clearly, but which had left a residue of something she had been trying to identify. He had the notebook in his hand, and was looking at it for the second it took him to understand that he was holding something he should not be reading, and then he closed it, and held it out to her. She took it. Their fingers did not touch. He made sure of that, she noticed. He stepped back a half step to make sure of it. She tucked the notebook back into her apron pocket and bent to pick up the pen from the crack in the pavement. I've been meaning to take that corner slower, he said. I keep cutting it. She looked at him. She pulled the notebook back out. On the inside cover, where she kept a running notepad for quick exchanges, she wrote, "You took it at the same speed I did." He read it. A corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Acknowledgement. Fair, he said. He was still holding the crate. He seemed to realize this and offered it to her. She took it. He said, "I was actually coming to find the bakery. I didn't get there before you opened this morning." She raised her eyebrows. A question. Is there anything left? The almond ones, if you have them. She tilted her head toward the back door, which was still propped open from when she had come out. He followed her in through the back, which no one did, but she had not thought about it until they were already inside, which was also unusual because she thought about most things in advance. The back of the bakery was where the actual work happened, as opposed to the front, which was where the work was sold. It was smaller than it looked from outside, organized with the specific efficiency of a space that one person had arranged over time to suit exactly one person's way of moving. There were shelves and hooks and a prep table, and 2 ovens, and a long wooden counter worn smooth and pale from years of use. It smelled, back here, less like the sweet greeting smell of the front, and more like the serious smell of bread doing what bread does. He stood by the door, and did not move into the space. He seemed to understand that there was a difference between being invited through a back door and being invited into a back room. She gestured, briefly, toward one of the high stools by the counter. He moved to it and sat. She went to the case that held the finished goods for the morning, found the almond tarts, plated 2, poured a coffee from the industrial urn that was always on, and brought them to the counter. He ate and drank and looked at the back of the bakery with a look she had not seen on his face before. Not the assessing look from when he was reading the folder of papers, something more like the look of a person who is being reminded of something. "My mother used to bake," he said. She did not know this. She had not known there was a mother in the picture, living or otherwise. He said it the way people say things they did not plan to say, with a slightly flattened quality, like a sentence that ran faster than the speaker intended. "She stopped when we were young. I don't remember what changed." Lena looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote, "People stop things for all kinds of reasons." "Yes," he said. He did not elaborate. She did not push. She went to work on the noon batch, because noon did not wait for anyone's emotional history, and he sat at the stool and finished his coffee, and looked at nothing in particular, and the back of the bakery held both of them in the way that working spaces hold people, with a quiet practicality that made everything feel slightly less loaded than it would have been in a sitting room or on a street. After a while he said, "I saw Ida McAllister yesterday." She looked up. "She's good. You were right." He paused. "She thinks it's fixable. The property thing. It will take time, and it will be unpleasant, but it's fixable." She wrote, "Are you going to stay while it's being fixed?" He looked at the question. He seemed to consider it in the way that he seemed to consider most things, from the inside out, working through it before answering. "I don't know," he said. "Longer than I planned." She nodded. He said, "How long have you been in Grayfield?" She wrote, "My whole life." "Did you ever want to leave?" She wrote the answer before she thought about whether to write it. "Yes. Then I stopped wanting that, and wanted something else instead. I'm not sure what yet." He read it. He did not comment on it, which she appreciated, because comments would have required her to explain something she had not finished understanding. He said, "What do you want from this town?" "Not eventually, right now." She looked at the question. It was a specific kind of question, precise and without softness, the kind that required a precise and honest answer. She had not been asked this question before. People in Grayfield did not ask her what she wanted. They either told her, implicitly or explicitly, what she should want, or they did not ask at all. She thought about it, then she wrote, "For Mara Voss to walk into a room and see me, and not feel like she has permission to do whatever she likes." She turned the notebook around and watched him read it. His face did something. Not surprise. Not exactly. He had the face of a man receiving information that answers a question he had been carrying, and the information is worse than he had hoped. He said, "What has she done?" She shook her head. She took the notebook back. She wrote, "That's not why I said it. You asked what I want. That's the answer. I'm not asking you to do anything about it. He read it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very carefully, I'm aware that my sister is not a good person. She looked at him. She wrote, does she know you think that? She knows I've been away, he said. She's been told that means she could do what she liked. Lena thought about this. She thought about it the way she thought about the record, with attention to the details of who knew what and when. She wrote, are you going to tell her differently? I'm already telling her differently, he said, in about 6 other ways, currently, most of them involving a solicitor and some overdue paperwork. He paused, but I don't know the specifics. Of what she's done. Here, to people. She looked at him. He looked back. She put the notebook away. She turned back to the prep table and worked in silence for about a minute. He did not fill the silence. He waited. Then she reached under the counter where her bag was hanging on its hook, the one she brought to work every day, and she unzipped the inner pocket, the one with nothing in it, except a small flat notebook, a different one, smaller than her daily green one, with a dark cover and no ink stain. She did not take it out. She just touched the spine of it with 2 fingers. She was deciding something. She put the bag back on the hook. She turned around. She wrote, on the inside cover of the green notebook, not yet, but keep showing up. He read it. He read it twice. I'll be here at 7, he said. She nodded. She went back to the dough. He stayed another 20 minutes, finishing the coffee, saying nothing, and then he put the cup in the tray by the door that was for cups to be washed, which nobody who came through the back had ever done before, and left through the alley the way he had come in. She stood at the prep table after he was gone, and looked at the door for about 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds. Then she looked at the dough, and the dough had not shaped itself while she was not looking, which was the thing about dough. It never helped you. It just waited. She started shaping. The morning stretched forward. Customers came and went through the front. Owen arrived for his Thursday shift early start, and she showed him how to restock the upper shelf without standing on the stool with the wobble. He was a quick learner, Owen. She liked that about him. Around 11, when the bakery was between rushes, Lena went to the small back bathroom that doubled as a storage space for cleaning supplies, and she looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. It was not something she did often, not because she was afraid of what she would see, but because mirrors asked you to stop, and she rarely stopped. What she saw was a face she knew very well, dark eyes that had learned, through years of necessity, to do a great deal of work, a jaw set in a way that was not quite stubbornness but was adjacent to it, flour in her hair, always, the slightly reddened knuckles of someone whose hands were always in water, or dough, or both. She did not look like a person anyone would describe as remarkable. She had always known this. You are not remarkable, was one of the first things that Grayfield had taught her, in the various ways it had been teaching her things since she was 12. You are a mute omega from nowhere in particular, with no family here, and no rank, and no voice, and no reason for anyone to pay attention. She had spent a long time deciding that this was not a verdict, it was just a description, and descriptions were only as powerful as you let them be. She washed her hands and went back to work. She did not think about the dark notebook in her bag. She did not think about keep showing up and what she had meant when she wrote it, and whether she had meant it in the way it could be read. She baked bread, she sold it, she made change. She nodded and pointed, and wrote small things on small notes, and managed, as she always managed, the daily labor of being a person who communicated without a voice, in a world that was built around them. At the end of her shift, she walked home in the February cold, and the snow was falling again, and the street was empty, and she looked up at the mountains that she could not see in the dark but knew were there. She thought, keep showing up. She thought, to what end? She did not have an answer. But the thought did not frighten her, which was something. The thought of an answer existing somewhere was something. She kept walking. By the end of the second week of February, Calum Voss had become a fixed feature of the bakery morning, in the way that only the oldest regulars were fixed features, which is to say that his absence on any given day was now noticeable in the way that a missing chair is noticeable, not because the room needed it, but because the room had adjusted itself around the fact of it being there. On Wednesday he did not come. She noticed at 7:12, and then did not think about it again until 8:40, when she noticed again. By noon, she had stopped noticing. He came in Thursday at 7:04 looking like he had not slept. She put the coffee in front of him without being asked. He said, "Thank you," in the flat way of a person who is operating on courtesy alone. She let him drink. She did not ask. She continued the batch work, the steady rhythm of prep, which had its own comfort in it, the comfort of tasks that have a clear sequence and clear ends. Mix, shape, proof, bake. This was the backbone of her day, and it held everything else up. After 20 minutes he said, "Mara called last night." She did not look up. "She knows I spoke to Ida McAllister. She knows why." He paused. She wasn't angry. That was the strange part. She was very calm about it. Lena understood what that meant. The calm. She had been on the receiving end of Mara's calm many times. Mara's anger was the kind that arrived quiet, that did its work with precision and patience. She had learned this at 13, and relearned it at 16, and had it confirmed again at 18. The calm was the warning, not the storm. The calm was what came before Mara decided what to do. She picked up her notebook and wrote, "You should prepare for her to move first." He read it. He said, "She already has," or "She started." He did not say what exactly. She did not ask. It was not her situation to push on. But something tightened in her, something that was not exactly fear, and not exactly the thing the record was built on, but something between them. If Mara was moving against her brother's legal steps, then Mara would be in a frame of mind in which consequences mattered less than demonstration. And when Mara was in that frame of mind, she needed a demonstration. She always had. And Lena had always been the easiest available surface for it. She did not say this. She could not, entirely, explain it in notebook shorthand in a bakery kitchen, while also managing a dough that was reaching the edge of its proofing window. She wrote, "Be careful," and went back to her work. He watched her for a moment. Then he said, "What does that mean for you, specifically?" She looked up. He said, "I'm not asking out of nowhere. I know Mara's history in this town. I'm starting to understand that there are people who've had to navigate around her for a long time." He paused. "I'm asking because I'm asking. Not because I want to do something about it. Because I want to understand." She held the pen over the notebook. This was a kind of question she did not receive very often. In fact, she was not certain she had ever received this exact question from someone in this way, without agenda visible under the surface of it, without the hint of someone wanting something from the answer. She wrote, "It means I'll be paying close attention to the next week or two, and I'll have my second notebook closer than usual." He read it. He said, "Second notebook." She nodded. He did not ask about the second notebook. He seemed to understand that this was the end of that sentence. He finished his coffee and straightened the folder of papers he had brought, and stood. "7 tomorrow," he said. She nodded. He left. She slid the dough into the oven and set the timer, and stood for a moment in the warmth of it, her hands at her sides, watching the orange glow behind the oven glass. The second notebook was already in her bag. It had been there since Monday. She was always prepared. That was the thing that no one ever saw, from the outside. People saw the stillness, and they read it as passivity. What it was readiness. Lena Holt had been ready for the next thing for 7 years. She had her documentation. She had her precision. She had her record. She had spent years building the thing that nobody saw her building, because nobody ever thought to look. They would not think to look now either. That was, in its way, one of the very few advantages her position had ever given her. She was invisible right up until she was not, and she had been choosing, very carefully, the moment when she would stop being invisible, and the moment had not arrived yet. But it was arriving. She could feel the shape of it the way you feel weather, in the pressure of the air, in the particular quality of the quiet before something changes. She went back to the oven. She checked the bread. She waited for it to be ready. The thing about learning someone's language was that you did not decide to do it. It happened, the way all language acquisition happened, through proximity and repetition, and the slow, cumulative process of patterns becoming visible. Calum Voss learned Lena's language over the course of February. He learned that the raised eyebrow meant he should repeat or clarify. He learned that when she turned the notebook to face him quickly, it was information she was confident in, and when she turned it slowly, she was still deciding whether to say it at all. He learned that the flat palm was no, and the tilt of the head was a question, and that when she set down what she was holding to look at him directly, She was paying attention in a way that was different from her usual attention, which was already considerable. He was a fast learner. She noticed this about him across the days, the way he never asked her to repeat something she had written, never looked confused in the way that required re-explaining. Whatever he had built in the years since leaving Grayfield, he had built it partly through paying attention to things other people did not think to pay attention to. She had built things the same way. It was mid-February when she gave him the card. Not Ida McAllister's card, a different one, the business card she had had made at the print shop on the high street 2 years ago, before she had fully understood that the bakery would become the main thing. It said her name, and below it said, "Available for private baking orders," and then her email address, which was her only reliable form of outside communication, and which she checked on her phone in the evenings. She gave it to him because he had mentioned, in passing, that he was dealing with an estate dinner, an obligation that the solicitor process had turned up, a formal meal for a handful of people, that was apparently tied to some clause in the inheritance, and which he was dreading. She gave it to him the way she gave Ida McAllister's card, as information. She had catering capacity. That was a fact. He looked at the card. He looked at her. She shrugged slightly. "If you need it." "I'll need it," he said. And then he looked at the card again for a moment longer than necessary, and she thought he was going to say something else, and he did not, and she went back to the prep table. She thought about it later, the moment, the slightly longer than necessary. She thought about it the way you think about something that is not quite clear in the peripheral vision, not turning your head to look directly, but remaining aware of it. She was aware that she had begun to look forward to 7 a.m., in a way she had not looked forward to 7 a.m. before he arrived. She was aware that the back room felt different when he was in it, the way a room feels different when someone has been thoughtful enough not to crowd it. She was aware, in the careful way she was always aware of things she needed to think precisely about, that she was approaching a piece of personal territory that she had not entered in a very long time, and that she had not entered voluntarily, the last time. The last time had been at 16, a person named Garrett who had been kind enough in the beginning and then had decided, around month 2, that her silence was a thing he was entitled to fill with his own words, his own choices, the slow assumption of preference that some people mistook for affection. She had ended it before it went anywhere serious. She had been very clear in her notebook about why, which had been the first time she had used the notebook to be completely direct with someone about something difficult, and it had worked, which had surprised her, the precision of it, the fact that written words could be more effective than spoken ones because they could not be interrupted, or talked over, or reinterpreted on the fly. She had learned something from that. She had used it since. Calum was not Garrett. They occupied different categories entirely, which was itself something she noted, the ease of the distinction. She packed the distinction away and went back to work. The estate dinner was on a Friday, in the 3rd week of February. She had prepared a 4-course menu, practical and good, the kind of food that didn't announce itself but that people remembered, and she had delivered it to the Voss house at the edge of town, for the first time since she was 16, when she had been dared to walk up the driveway by girls she no longer thought about. And she had walked up the driveway and all the way to the front door and knocked, and no one had answered, and she had walked back, and the girls had laughed about this for months. The house was large and cold, and had the specific atmosphere of a place that had been emptied of its primary occupant, and not yet refilled. There was a woman named Helen who helped with housekeeping, who let her in through the kitchen and showed her the dining room and the equipment available, and then left her to it with the quiet efficiency of someone who had seen the house go through many phases, and had opinions about none of them. Lena set up, cooked, plated. She stayed in the kitchen during the meal itself, and did not come out. Calum came through once, to say the food was exceptional, with the specific word exceptional, and she nodded, and kept working on the dessert. After the guests were gone, she was cleaning up when he came back into the kitchen, and sat on the counter, in a way that seemed to be his natural mode of sitting in kitchens, counter instead of chair. He looked tired again, but a different kind of tired, the kind that comes from getting through something difficult without any visible damage. The dinner was for the county council, he said. Some of them have been doing business with Mara for years. There's a road development that affects the eastern edge of the family land, and there's been a question about how the surveying was done. I needed them in a room where I was being a Voss, and not just a problem. She raised her eyebrows. He said, I think it worked. The food helped. You made it easier than it would have been. She wrote on the notepad she carried in her bag. That's what food does. It makes people less defensive. He read it. Is that something you figured out, or were you taught it? She thought about this. She wrote, figured out. People guard themselves less when their hands are occupied with something good. It's not complicated. Nothing you say is ever complicated, he said. He said it like an observation, not a compliment. She looked at him. He added, I mean that as a compliment. You don't waste words, I've noticed that. She wrote, I have limited space. I learned to use it carefully. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, what was it like? After. When you came back to school and couldn't speak anymore. She looked at the question. She looked at him. The kitchen was quiet around them, warm from the ovens, and the night was solid and cold outside the window. And she thought about whether she wanted to answer this, and decided that she did, or something close to it, which was close enough. She wrote, loud. Everything was louder than before. I think you don't notice how much sound you make until you stop making it, and realize all the sound is still there. It's just other people's now. I noticed things more. I watched more. I got very good at watching. He read it, he said. And the other kids? She shrugged. Then she wrote, briefly, you know how kids are. He said, I know how Grayfield kids are. She looked at him again. He said, I grew up here too. I know how the system works, who's at the top and who isn't, and how the ones at the top make sure everyone knows it. I left because I wanted to build something in a place where that wasn't the first thing you knew about yourself. He paused. I didn't think about what I was leaving behind when I left. She wrote, you couldn't have done anything if you'd stayed. You were 21. I know, he said. I know that. It doesn't make the not thinking about it feel any better. She looked at him for a long moment. She wrote, you're thinking about it now. Yes, he said. She wrote, that's something. He looked at the words. He looked at her. He said, is it? She held his gaze. She wrote, slowly. Yes. Most people don't. He was quiet again after that, and she finished the cleaning, and he helped without being asked, drying the dishes she handed him, stacking them in the order she indicated, and they worked in the kitchen together in the particular ease of two people who had been around each other long enough to move without colliding, which was no small thing, she thought. Two people in a kitchen, with no words spoken, and no friction. She had not had that with anyone before. He drove her home. She had not asked, and had not expected it, but when she put on her coat and picked up her bag, he was already doing the same, and she had written why on the notepad, and he had written back, in the notebook she handed him for the first time, because he did not have paper, if that's all right. And she had looked at his handwriting, which was small and very clear, and nodded. The drive was 10 minutes, which was long enough for silence to be either comfortable or not, and it was comfortable, which she was aware of specifically, because comfortable silence was rarer than people pretended. He stopped outside the hardware store. She got out. She looked back once through the passenger window, and he was looking at her, with the expression she had not been able to categorize the first time she saw it, and still could not fully categorize now. She nodded. He nodded back. She went upstairs. She stood in her apartment in her coat for a moment, before taking it off, looking at nothing, aware of the quality of the quiet around her, which was the same quiet it always was, and somehow felt slightly different. Not emptier, not fuller, just a different shade of the same thing. She took off her coat. She made tea. She sat at the window and looked at the pool of light from the hardware store sign. She did not take the second notebook out. She thought about the handwriting. Small and clear. She thought about that. She went to bed early, for a bakery person, which meant before 10. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the street, which were mostly quiet, and to the sound of her own breath, which was even, and to the thought that was moving around the edges of everything she did not want to name. She did not name it. She went to sleep. The next morning she was at the bakery at 4:30. She had never been late for an opening in 2 years. She was not late now. She turned on the lights in the ovens, and put on her apron, and began. 7 o'clock came, and he came with it, the way he had come every morning now for nearly 4 weeks. And he sat at the counter in the back, and she brought the coffee and the almond tart, and they did not say anything about the previous evening, and she appreciated this. The way you appreciate a person who understands the difference between what needs to be said and what simply needs to be let sit for a while. He had his folder, she had her dough. He read something that made the crease between his eyebrows deepen. She shaped rolls and did not look. He sighed. Once, through his nose, the sound of someone who is not surprised but is tired. She's contesting the solicitor's standing, he said. Mara. She's claiming Ida McAllister has a conflict of interest because she did work for the county 6 years ago. She doesn't. There's no conflict. But the challenge will slow things down for a month, minimum. Lena kept working. She wrote on the counter notepad without stopping her other hand. She knows it won't work. She's buying time. For what? She looked at him. She wrote, for me to find out. He read it. He put the folder down. He looked at her with the clear-eyed directness that she had come to recognize as his version of paying full attention. He said, is there anything I should know, that you haven't told me? She set down the roll she was shaping. She turned to face him fully. She wrote, carefully, there's a lot I haven't told you, and there's a reason I haven't. It's not because I don't trust you. It's because some things need to happen in the right order. He read it twice. He said, okay. Just that. Okay. The acknowledgement of someone who understood that pressing would accomplish nothing and had enough self-awareness not to press. She picked up the roll. She went back to shaping. The morning moved through its familiar stages. Customers came and went. Owen arrived and helped with the middle of the day. Around 11, Lena was at the register when Fiona, Mara's orbit friend from the property office, came in to buy 2 things she did not usually buy, and smiled at Lena in the way that people smile when they have information they find satisfying, and Lena filed the smile into the part of her mind where she filed things that were not yet evidence, but would be useful later. Fiona worked at the property office. Mara was contesting Ida McAllister's standing. These 2 things had not touched each other in her thinking until Fiona smiled in that particular way. She filed it. She made change. She nodded pleasantly. After Fiona left, she went to the back room and stood very still for 1 minute, just organizing. The way she organized data in her head, putting things in their proper sequence, the way the record taught her to do. Then she put her apron back on and went back to the counter. At the end of her shift, she went home, and she took the second notebook out from under the bed. She did not reread it. She had read it enough times that she could reproduce most of it from memory. She held it and thought about the right order of things. She thought about Caleb's question. She thought about the word, okay. She thought about what it would mean to show him the notebook. She thought about what it would mean not to. She had been keeping the record for 7 years. She had been keeping it as evidence. She had been keeping it for someone, in the back of her mind, without being able to say who or when. She turned the notebook over in her hands. She put it back. Not yet. But the not yet was different from the not yet of 3 weeks ago. The not yet of 3 weeks ago was indefinite. This not yet had a shape. It had something on the other side of it. She went to the window and looked at the pool of light, and for the first time in a long time, she did not think about how long she would be looking at it. She just looked at it, in the moment it was in, and found that the moment was not as small as she had been treating it. She exhaled. She went to bed. The week that followed was quiet, in a way that Lena had learned not to trust. Not the quiet of nothing happening, but the quiet of things happening below the surface. The specific silence of water before it comes to a boil. She worked. She baked. She served. She documented. She watched Fiona come in on Thursday and buy things she did not need again. She watched Caitlin walk past the window twice in one afternoon. She watched the way the town moved around the fact of Caleb Voss being in it, the slight recalibration of social posture, the extra attention in certain people's eyes when he came to the bakery, as though his presence in a low-ranking space said something they were still working out how to categorize. She watched all of it. She also, for the first time in 4 years, allowed herself the beginning of something that was not quite hope and not quite plan, but was perhaps the specific small precursor to both. The sense that the ground she was standing on had changed, in some quality she could not yet name, but which registered in her body, the way changes in atmospheric pressure register, below the level of articulation, but undeniably present. She was careful with it. She did not nurture it. She simply noted that it was there and continued doing her work. On Friday, Ida McAllister came in for her cheese rolls. She sat at the counter in the front while Lena got them, and she said, quietly, the way she always said everything, which was precisely and without decoration. The challenge Mara Voss filed has no legal merit. It will be dismissed by the second week of March. Lena looked at her. She got the notebook. She wrote, "And then?" Ida said, "And then things move quickly. Calum Voss has a strong case. The transfer was improperly filed with the county registrar's stamp, obtained through what I can only describe as a significant misrepresentation." She paused. "He will win, but Mara knows she will lose, and people who know they're going to lose spend the time before losing very uselessly." Lena wrote, "How usefully?" Ida looked at the note. She said, "That depends on what she has available to her." Lena looked at the bakery around her, the case, the counter, the small corkboard with its business cards, the mountains through the window. She wrote, "I think I know what she'll use." Ida looked at her for a long moment. She said, "Do you need any help with that?" Lena wrote, "Not yet, but thank you." Ida took her rolls. She paid. She left, and the door closed behind her. And Lena stood at the counter and thought about the word uselessly, and the gap before March, and what Mara Voss did when she knew something was coming for her. She thought about all of it, and then she finished her shift and went home and sat with the second notebook for a long time, and when she finally put it away, she had made a decision about the right order of things that felt, for the first time, like it had a date attached to it. Not yet, but soon, very soon. It happened on a Saturday, which was the worst day for it to happen, because Saturdays were Lena's longest shifts, and the annual winter market was in the town square, and the bakery had a stall at the market that she was responsible for, which meant she had been on her feet since 4 in the morning, and it was now 2 in the afternoon, and she had eaten half a pastry at 9, and nothing since. The winter market was the largest event Greyfield held each year. It had been running for 25 years, which predated most of the current social architecture of the town, which meant it was one of the few spaces in Greyfield where the usual rules were partially suspended, because when you put several hundred people from the surrounding valley in a square, with food and music and warm drinks, the rankings and the affiliations softened at the edges. People spoke to people they would not ordinarily speak to. Children ran between the stalls without paying attention to who their parents were. It was one of the things Lena liked best about the market, the softening. She had a stall every year. Mr. Peel paid for the spot and she staffed it, selling the loaves and the pastries and the small boxes of sweet rolls that always went first. She was good at the market, in a way that was distinct from being good at the bakery counter. The market required a different set of skills, speed over precision, quick exchanges, the ability to manage several transactions in parallel, to communicate through the shorthand she had developed with years of regular customers and extend it, quickly, to strangers who had not yet learned it. She had developed a laminated card that sat at the front of the stall. She couldn't speak, but she could help, point at what you want, and she was always faster than she looked. By 2 in the afternoon, the stall was down to its last quarter stock, which was the right place to be at 2. She was packaging up the remaining loaves when she became aware of the particular change in crowd density that meant a group of people had stopped nearby, rather than moving through. She looked up. Mara Voss, Caitlin, Fiona, and 2 women she recognized as being from the county council's social circle, the kind of women who had been to all the right schools, and wore their authority in the specific way of people who had never once had to argue for it. They were not at the stall. They were in the open space 20 feet away, the slightly elevated walkway that ran beside the market, which meant they were visible to a wide area of the square, which Lena was certain was deliberate. She continued packaging. Mara was not looking at her. She was talking to the women from the county circle, and the conversation looked easy and warm, the practiced warmth of a person who was very good at being someone that powerful people wanted to stand near. Fiona and Caitlin were slightly behind, which was their usual position, which was useful, because it meant they saw everything Mara did not need to be seen doing. Lena had logged this positioning in the record before. It was consistent. The square was full. The market was loud with the sounds of people in a good mood. Someone was playing guitar near the eastern stall, not well but with feeling, which was perhaps more important. Children were eating things they would regret later, with the complete absence of future regret awareness that was one of the genuine gifts of being young. Old Mr. Peel was at the far end of the square, talking to another shopkeeper, his hands moving in the animated way they moved when he was either annoyed or delighted, and from the distance she could not tell which. She was wrapping the last loaf when Caitlin moved. Not toward her. Toward the stall from the side, the way you move toward something when you are not officially moving toward it. Lena tracked this in her peripheral vision. Caitlin leaned on the edge of the stall with the relaxed posture of someone looking at the goods, and said, loudly enough to carry, but not loudly enough to be official, to no one in particular, I heard the quality's been going downhill lately, since she started working alone more. Fiona, still near Mara, laughed at something Mara said. The two county women smiled. Lena continued wrapping the loaf. Caitlin said, still to no one, must be hard to keep standards up when you can't communicate properly. Half the special orders have apparently been wrong. This was not true. Lena knew it was not true, because she kept records of every special order. But the point was not the truth of it. The point was the audience. A dozen people near the stall could hear it. Some of them were looking at Caitlin. Some were looking at Lena. The ones looking at Lena were doing the human thing of checking for a reaction, because a reaction was information, and also, if Lena was honest with herself, because some of them were curious whether she would one. She finished wrapping the loaf. She placed it in the box with the others. She straightened the remaining items on the display table. She looked at the crowd beyond the stall. Not at Caitlin, not at Mara, not at the county women, just at the broader movement of the market, the way she had been looking at the market all day. She was fine. She was absolutely fine. And then Caleb Voss walked out of the crowd, from the direction of the eastern stall, and came toward her stall, with the same direct walk that she had watched walk out of the bakery, every morning for 4 weeks. And the crowd in the path he was taking, adjusted for him, in the way that crowds adjust for someone who moves like the room is already theirs. And he came to the stall, and looked at what was left and said, 2 of those, if there are any left. And whatever's in the box. She wrote the price on the notepad and turned it around. He looked past the notepad. He looked at Caitlin, who was still at the corner of the stall. He looked at Mara, visible on the walkway. He looked back at Lena. And there was a thing that happened in his face that she had not seen there before. A very specific and very controlled thing that was not anger in the way of someone who loses control, but anger in the way of someone who has been given a piece of information they had been looking for and now have to decide what to do with it. He looked at Caitlin. He said, "Can I help you?" Caitlin looked at him. All the ease went out of her in about a second. She said, "I was just shopping?" He said. His voice was pleasant. The pleasantness of it was the most alarming thing about the sentence. "The stall's that way." He indicated the front of the table. "Or there are other stalls, if this one isn't what you need." Caitlin looked at Mara. Mara had gone very still on the walkway, with the particular stillness of someone who is reassessing. Caitlin moved away. Caleb turned back to Lena. He said, "The 2, and whatever's in the box." She took the money. She made change. Their hands touched briefly, and she did not pull back, which was a small decision she was aware of making. He took the bag. He did not look at Mara again. He turned around and walked back into the crowd and disappeared into it. Lena stood behind the display table. The market continued. The guitar player started another song, better this time. Nearby, a child was explaining something to a parent with great urgency. The crowd moved in its easy loops. She looked at Mara on the walkway. Mara was looking at her, not the social calculation look, not the public performance, just looking, for a brief moment, one person at another. Lena held the look. Then she reached under the counter and took out the next box of goods to display, because the morning's depleted stock needed replenishing, and she arranged the items on the table with care, and the next customer came, and she was already writing the price on her notepad before they finished deciding. She was fine. She had been fine. But something had happened in the 20 minutes of that exchange that she was still organizing, something that had to do with the look on Caleb's face, and the way the crowd adjusted for him, and the 2 seconds when their hands had been in contact over the counter, something that she put carefully into a specific compartment, and closed the door of, and did not look directly at for the rest of the day. The market closed at 4. She packed up the stall. She loaded the empty crates into Mr. Peel's car. She walked back to the bakery, which was 3 blocks from the square, and cleaned the counters, and covered the cases for tomorrow, and washed the last of the equipment, and turned off the lights. She was at the back door putting on her coat when she heard footsteps outside, not coming closer, just present. She opened the door. He was leaning against the wall of the alley, looking at his phone. He looked up. She looked at him. She wrote on the notepad, "You didn't have to do that." He read it. He said, "I know." She wrote, "She'll use it against you." He said, "Let her." She looked at him for a longer moment than usual. He stood in the alley in the February cold, in his too light coat, which she had stopped noticing as too light because it had simply become his coat now, and he looked back at her with the steady clarity that she had come to associate with him the way you associate particular qualities with particular things. She wrote, "What were you doing at the market?" He said, "I was buying bread." She looked at him. She wrote, "You get bread at 7 every morning." He said, "I needed more bread." She held the notepad and the pen and looked at him with the look that she had trained from years of watching and deciding, and she understood, in the way she understood things, that he was not talking about bread. She put the notepad in her pocket. She started walking home. After 3 steps, she looked back once, briefly. He fell into step beside her. He did not take her arm or her hand. He walked at her pace, half a step to her right, and she was aware of the warmth of another person walking close on a cold February evening, in a way that she did not have a word for in any format, notebook or otherwise. They walked to the hardware store, and she went upstairs, and he went back the way they had come, and she stood at the window in the dark and watched the pool of light and thought about what was coming, which was Mara's next move and Ida McAllister's timeline, and the second notebook under the bed. She thought about all of that. She thought about it seriously and clearly, the way she thought about everything she needed to think about clearly. And then, for approximately 4 minutes, she allowed herself to think about something else, about walking, and the cold, and the half-step to her right. 4 minutes was more than she usually allowed. She went to bed. 3 days after the market, Mara moved, not sideways this time, directly. She called Mr. Peel. Lena knew this because Mr. Peel came in on a Tuesday morning, which he did not usually do on Tuesdays, and he had the look of a man who had been told something he did not like, and had been thinking about it since. He waited until the early rush cleared, which Lena appreciated about him, and then he came to the back and sat on the stool that did not wobble, which everyone eventually found, and he looked at the counter for a moment. Then he said, "Mara Voss has asked me to consider selling the bakery." Lena went still. He said, "She had a figure. It was more than the place is worth, by a significant amount, which tells you what the offer is really about." He paused. "I told her I'd think about it." She wrote, "Are you going to?" He said, "No. I'm not going to sell this place to Mara Voss for any amount of money." He said it with a quiet firmness that she had always liked in him. He continued, "But I wanted you to know," she asked. "And I wanted you to know that the only reason she asked was to put you out of a job and out of this space." She made that clear enough between the lines. Lena wrote, "She's losing something more important to her than the bakery. She's trying to control what she can still touch." Mr. Peel read it. He looked at her for a moment with the particular look of a person who has known someone for long enough to have an opinion about them that they rarely articulate. He said, "You're a very clear-headed person, Lena. Do you know that?" She shrugged. She wrote, "It's cheaper than being unclear." He went back to the front. She stood in the back for a moment with her hands on the prep table. She breathed, she thought, she reached a conclusion. She took out her phone and typed an email to Calum. She had his contact from the catering card exchange, and she had not used it until now. She typed. She went to Mr. Peel. He said no. She's out of property moves. Next week will tell us what she tries instead. He replied in 3 minutes. "I know. She called me last night. I told her no." She put the phone away. She went back to the dough. Mara had called her brother, and her brother had told her no, and now Mara knew that the usual way of things had changed, that the person who held the top of the Voss name in Greyfield was no longer someone she could count on to be absent or to be useful. Lena understood what that meant for the rest of February. She understood it the way she understood the space behind the loose board under her bed, the way she understood the weight of 7 years of documentation in a small dark notebook. She understood it the way a person understands, the moment before something ends, clearly, without softness, without pretending it is smaller than it is. The next thing was coming. It was going to be the worst thing. It was going to be the thing that required her to be the most precise, the most clear, the most exact version of herself. She had been preparing for it since she was 12. She was ready. The dough was ready too. She slid it into the oven. She set the timer. She stood in the warm kitchen in the February morning, and she was 19 years old, and she had flour on her hands, and she knew exactly what she was doing. For the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. The last week of February arrived with a sharp frost that turned the mountain trails silver at the edges and made the road through town slick in the early mornings so that people walked carefully, paying attention to their feet. Lena walked carefully all the time, a habit of body built from years of practice, so the frost changed nothing for her. What changed was the tempo. Ida McAllister stopped into the bakery on Monday, not for rolls, which told Lena something. She came in at 9 when the first rush was clearing, and she sat at the front counter and accepted a coffee and said, without preamble, "The challenge was dismissed this morning. We proceed on schedule. I wanted you to know before it was in the official registry." Lena wrote, "How long before Mara knows?" Ida said, "She already knows. Her solicitor would have been notified at the same time." A pause. "I'd give her 24 hours before she makes her last move." Lena looked at her. Ida said, "Whatever she's been holding back, people like Mara Voss always hold something back for the end. The question is, what it is." Lena thought. She thought about Fiona and the property office. She thought about the smile Fiona had given her 2 weeks ago, the satisfied one. She thought about the way information moved in Grayfield, the specific routes it took, and who sat at the nodes of those routes, and who had access to what. She wrote, "I think I know. I've been preparing for it." Ida looked at her with the look of someone who is reassessing a thing they thought they understood. She said, "All right." She finished the coffee. She left. Lena stood at the counter for a moment. Then she took out her phone and typed another email to Calum. Short this time. 3 words. Dismissal came through. He replied in under a minute. "I saw." "You okay?" She looked at the question. She wrote back, "Yes. Stay close to your phone tonight." He did not reply immediately. Then, "Always." She put the phone in her apron pocket and went to work. The afternoon was ordinary. Owen came for the afternoon shift. The light changed the way it changed at the end of February, getting longer by increments, the sun arriving a minute or two later each day at the angle that came through the east window and put a narrow stripe of gold across the display case. She had been tracking this angle for 2 years, not deliberately, but you track things when you see them daily, when they become part of your measure of what time it is, and she was aware that the stripe was moving. She liked the stripe. She liked the way it moved. She closed up at 6. She walked home in the dark, which was not as dark as it had been a month ago, and she went upstairs and she made dinner, which she ate at the table, and she took the second notebook out, and she read through the last 6 entries, the ones from the past 3 weeks, because the last 6 entries were the ones that were most current and most relevant, and which she had not yet done anything with. She read them twice. She organized them in her head. Then she did something she had not done in 7 years of keeping the record. She took a photograph of each page, one by one, with her phone, in the good light from the table lamp. Clear photographs, every word legible. She saved them to the cloud storage she paid for, the one with the locked folder. She put the notebook back. She sat at the table and looked at what she had done. It felt significant. It felt like the thing you do the night before something. She went to the window. The pool of light from the hardware store sign was there as it always was. She looked at it. She had been looking at this light for 2 years. She had been in Grayfield for 19. She had been keeping the record for 7. She had been waiting, in the specific way she had been waiting, without naming what she was waiting for all of that time. She thought, tomorrow. She thought, or the day after. She thought, whenever it comes, I'm ready. She did not feel afraid. She was aware of this. Fear was a reasonable response to what was coming, and she had prepared for it, and processed it so many times in advance that what she felt now was something more like the specific, focused calm of someone standing behind a starting line who has been training for the race since they were 12 years old. She had trained for this. She was ready. She went to bed. Tomorrow the bakery would open at 5. The dough would need shaping. The coffee urn would need filling. Owen would come at noon. The stripe of light through the east window would cross the display case at 7:23. Everything would be exactly as it always was. until it was not. And then she would be ready for that too. The thing that Mara had been holding back was the lease. Lena found out on a Wednesday, which was the second day of March, at 8:17 in the morning, when a young man from the Grayfield property office came into the bakery, with an envelope and the expression of someone who would genuinely prefer to be somewhere else. He asked for Mr. Peel by name. Lena wrote that Mr. Peel was not in until noon. The young man looked at the envelope and then at her, and said he was instructed to leave it with whoever was in charge. She took the envelope. He left quickly. She looked at the envelope. It was from Grayfield Valley Property Management, which was the company that held the lease on the bakery building. It was addressed to the tenant, attention occupier. She opened it. She read it carefully, the way she read everything, once for information and once for what the information meant. The lease, which was in Mr. Peel's name and which ran until November, contained a clause, Clause 14B, which she had never read because Mr. Peel had never shown her the lease, and she had not asked, which was a gap she was now noting with the precision she applied to all gaps. Clause 14B stated that in the event of a change in primary operator, meaning the person who physically ran the establishment day to day, the property management company reserved the right to review the tenancy. The letter stated that it had come to the company's attention that the primary operator of the bakery was no longer Mr. Peel, but an unregistered operator. The letter requested documentation confirming the operator's legal standing within 30 days, failing which the tenancy would be subject to review. Grayfield Valley Property Management was owned, she knew, by the Voss family. She set the letter on the counter. She stood very still for approximately 30 seconds. She organized what she knew. She organized what she needed to do. She organized what order to do it in. Then she took out her phone and photographed the letter. She emailed it to Ida McAllister. She emailed it to Calum. She sent both emails with the same 2-line note. This is what she was holding. Clause 14B, in the property lease. We have 30 days. Then she put the phone down and went back to the counter, because there was a customer, and the customer wanted rolls, and the customer was not part of this situation, and deserved their rolls the same as always. She served the rolls. She made change. She nodded. She served the next customer, and the next. By 8:45, Calum was at the back door of the bakery. She had heard him knock, which was how she knew he understood something about the morning that was different from the usual morning, because he had never knocked before. She let him in. He had the email open on his phone. He set it on the counter and looked at her. She looked back. He said, Clause 14B is void. She raised her eyebrows. He said, it's void because it was added to the lease 2 years ago through a company amendment that was not legally served to the tenant. The original lease doesn't contain it. The amendment requires countersignature from the tenant, which Mr. Peel never signed because he was never shown it. He paused. I went through all of the family property holdings last month with Ida. Every lease, every amendment, every clause. This is the third one where something was added without tenant signature. It was on my list. She stared at him. He said, I already emailed Ida. She's drafting the challenge. The clause is unenforceable. She wrote on the notepad, the words coming faster than she had written in weeks. How did you know to look at the leases? He said, I've been here for 6 weeks. I know what my family's properties are. I know the bakery building is in the portfolio. When Mara went after Mr. Peel about the sale last week and he said no, I started looking for what else she might have. She looked at him. She wrote, you were ahead of her. I was trying to be, he said. I didn't know if I was far enough ahead. She wrote, you were. He said, not without you. You told me she was moving. You told me to watch the lease timeline. He paused. I didn't know what specifically, but I was looking. She set the pen down. She looked at the counter. She looked at the letter, and then at the email on his phone. She looked at the situation from all angles, the way she had trained herself to do, and she could see it clearly. Mara had used the last thing she had, and it wasn't enough, because for the first time in 7 years, there had been someone standing next to Lena who was also looking, also watching, also paying attention. This was new. This was an entirely new thing. She picked up the pen. She wrote, thank you. He read it. He said, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't do it for the bakery. She looked at him. He said, I did it because I've been watching you come into this space every morning and run it with exactly the same precision and care, regardless of what anyone does or says. And it matters. What you've built in here matters. And I was not going to let Mara use a clause she invented in secret to take it from you. She did not move. She was very aware of the bakery around her, the smell of the morning batch still warm in the ovens, the light through the small window at the back, the counter under her hands, worn smooth. She wrote, and it took longer than usual. This has been the only place in Grayfield that has ever felt entirely mine. He read it. He said, I know. She wrote, how? He said, because of the way you move in it. You move in here the way people move in the place that belongs to them, not entitled, easy. There's a difference. He paused. I spent years trying to find a place I moved in that way. I haven't found it yet. She looked at him. She wrote, before she could stop herself, what does Grayfield feel like to you now? He said, like something I might be able to want back. I'm not sure yet. She held the pen. She did not write anything for a moment. He waited. She wrote, people don't usually ask to want things back. They either do or they don't. He said, I'm not usually in the situation of actively investigating whether I want something. He looked at her steadily. It's new for me too. She understood, with the precision she brought to all things, what they were not quite saying to each other, what was sitting in the space of the bakery between them, large enough to notice, and careful enough not to rush. She understood it, and she did not run from it, and she did not push toward it. She held it the way you hold something that is both fragile and important, level, in both hands. She wrote, go deal with Ida and the claws. He said, I'll be back at noon. She nodded. He left through the back. She stood at the counter for 1 minute. Just 1 minute. Then she went to the ovens and checked the bread, which was done, and she pulled it out and set it to cool, and the smell of it filled the back of the bakery, warm and right and exactly as it should be. She breathed. She went to the front to open the cases. Owen arrived at noon with his usual slight breathlessness, as though he had been moving faster than planned, and she showed him the new display arrangement she had been thinking about for the almond pastries, and he listened carefully and nodded, and together they rearranged the case, and it looked better. Calum came back at 12:20. He had a one-page document that Ida had printed and signed, which was the legal challenge to the clause. He put it on the counter. She read it. She nodded. He said, 30 days is now their problem to manage, not ours. She wrote, where is Mara? He said, at the family house. She knows about the challenge. She's not coming out today. Lena thought about this. She thought about Mara at the family house, working through the sequence of her failed moves, the property transfer, the solicitor challenge, the purchase offer to Mr. Peel, the lease clause. One by one, every lever she had tried to pull had been removed. There was one thing left that Mara had access to, and it was not property, and it was not legal levers. Lena wrote, she's going to go to people now, not paperwork. People. Calum said, what do you mean? She wrote, I mean she's going to do what she's always done. Talk. The way she talked at the bakery counter for years. The way she stood at the market and used Caitlin to say things in range of an audience. She's going to use people's perceptions, because that's the last thing she can use. He said, to damage what? My standing? Yours? She wrote, yes. And the connection between us. She'll try to make it look like whatever is happening here is something it isn't. He read it. He said, and what would she say it is? She looked at him. She wrote, that you're using me, that I'm a distraction, or a tool, you're keeping close while you deal with the estate, that whatever attention you've shown me is a way of managing this town and keeping people sympathetic while you take things from your sister. He was very still while he read this. He said, it's not what this is. She wrote, I know that. He said, I want to make sure you know it. She looked at him for a long moment. She wrote, I know a lot of things about you that you haven't told me. I've been watching for 6 weeks. I know what this is, and I know what it isn't. I am not asking for reassurance. He said, what are you asking for? She thought. She wrote, I'm asking you to be ready for people to say it, because they will. And I need to know that when they do, you won't pull back, because it's easier. He said, I'm not going to pull back. She wrote, it might be harder than you think. He said, let it be. She held his gaze for a moment. He held hers. She wrote, Okay, then we keep going. He said, yes. She went back to the prep table. He took the counter stool and opened his folder and worked. Owen moved between the front and the back with the quiet efficiency that Lena had been building in him over months. The afternoon stretched forward. The light through the east window did what it did at 3 p.m., which was turn slightly amber, slightly warm, the light of late winter days that were starting, just barely, to get an edge of something that was not yet spring, but was moving toward it. Lena needed the dough for the next morning's batch. She needed it with the weight of her whole body behind it, the way the recipe in the book had said, the one she had taught herself from after Mr. Peel's lessons had not quite covered the physics of it. Press, fold, turn, press again. She thought about what she was going to do in the next week. She had been preparing for it for years. She had all the pieces. She had the second notebook. She had the photographs. She had the dates and the times and the names and what was said and who was present. She had 7 years of precision. She was going to use them. She pressed and folded and turned. She thought about the right order. She thought about the people she needed to contact, the quiet alliances she had built over years, without meaning to build them, the other Omegas in Grayfield who had kept their own quiet records, and who had, in their own ways, been waiting for a moment, when the records would matter. She had never told them about each other. She had never coordinated. They were just people who had come through the bakery over 2 years, women mostly, some men, people on the lower rankings of Grayfield's social structure, who had said things at the counter, quietly, sometimes in writing because writing was the only way to say them to Lena, about what it was like in this town, what it cost, what they had to manage around. She had listened. She had noted. She had never done anything with it, because she had not known what to do that would last, rather than simply making things worse in the short term. She knew now. She pressed the dough. She folded it. She turned it. Outside, the light was going amber, and the mountains were catching the last of the afternoon, which in February from this angle was briefly extraordinary, the peaks going from gray to copper to almost red before the shadow came up. She could not see it from here, but she knew it was happening, the way she always knew. She finished the dough and covered it and put it on the shelf to rest. She washed her hands. She put her apron on its hook. She had work to do. She spent the evening at the kitchen table with her phone. She was not on social media. She did not have platforms. What she had was the email accounts of 7 people in Grayfield, 7 specific people, women and 2 men, who had said things at the bakery counter over 2 years, that she had written down carefully, and that she had been carrying ever since. She wrote each email the same way. She wrote it as herself, which meant it was short and precise, and asked only one question. Would you be willing to speak to someone trustworthy about what you've experienced in this town? Not publicly. Not yet. Just speak. She sent all 7. She put her phone face down on the table. She made herself eat something, pasta with olive oil and the last of the good cheese she had bought on Sunday, and she ate it at the window and watched the street below. 3 replies came before she finished eating. The first was from a woman named Paula, who worked at the pharmacy, and who had told Lena once, in writing, that she had lost a job promotion because the decision had been made by someone with long-standing ties to the Voss family, and that she had tried to challenge it and been advised by the HR person, quietly, that the challenge would not go well for her. Paula's reply said, yes. Who is trustworthy? The second was from a man named Daniel, who ran the small printing shop on the edge of the high street, and who had told Lena once that his business license renewal had been held up for 8 months, the year he had printed flyers for a local Omega rights group, and that the holdup had resolved as soon as he told the group he could not take their printing work anymore. Daniel's reply said, I've been waiting for this question for 2 years. The third was from a woman named Nina, who was 23 and worked 2 jobs, and who had told Lena once, in a single sentence she had written fast and taken the paper away quickly, that she had been told, by name, by someone who reported directly to Mara Voss, that she should not apply for the council youth program if she knew what was good for her. Nina's reply said, yes, please. Lena sat with the 3 replies. She looked at the screen for a long time. She wrote back to all 3. Ida McAllister, retired solicitor. Croft Lane. I will connect you. She is safe. Then she wrote to Ida. She wrote a longer email than she usually wrote, which was still not long, but longer, explaining what she had and what she was starting to gather, and why it mattered, and what she thought could be done with it, if it was organized and presented properly. She sent it at 8:47 p.m. Ida replied at 9:03, which for a woman in her 60s on a Wednesday evening was fast enough to tell Lena that she had been waiting too. The reply said, "Come to me on Friday morning. Bring the notebook." Lena read the message. She turned off the kitchen light. She sat in the dark by the window and breathed. This was real. This was happening. This was the thing she had been building without knowing what she was building it for. The record, and the relationships, and the years of precise attention. And it was real, and it was happening, and it was almost time. She allowed herself, in the dark, to feel the full weight of this for about 5 minutes. Not the strategy of it, not the planning, just the fact of it. 7 years. The notebooks. The flower on her wrist where the bruise had been. The lunch tables that made space against her. The girl at 13 who had arrived at school with a notebook and a silence and had been immediately identified as the one who could not fight back. She had fought back. Just very slowly, and very quietly, and in a format that no one had thought to watch for. She exhaled. She thought, 12-year-old Lena would have needed to know this was coming. She thought, she would have kept writing anyway. She did keep writing anyway. She wiped her face, which had gone slightly wet without her noticing, and she went to the sink and washed it with cold water, which was exactly the right temperature for stopping a thing in its tracks. She dried her face. She went to bed. Friday was 3 days away. She had work to do before then. She was ready to do it. She closed her eyes. She thought about the second notebook. She thought about Paula and Daniel and Nina, about the 4 others who had not yet replied, who might reply tomorrow, who might bring the count higher. She thought about Ida McAllister in her office on Croft Lane, with her clear voice, and her retired solicitor's mind, and her complete independence from anything the Voss name owned. She thought about Calum, briefly, because she thought about him now, the way the mind goes to a new familiar thing, the way it goes to something that has become part of the structure of a day. She thought about small and clear handwriting on a page in her notebook. She thought about okay. She fell asleep. The town began choosing sides, the way small towns always choose sides. Not all at once, and not loudly, but with the specific and inexorable momentum of water finding its level. It started, as most things in Greyfield started, with a conversation that was overheard, and then repeated, altered slightly with each repetition in the way that telephone games alter things, until the version circulating by Thursday had reached a shape that was both recognizable as the original and different from it, in ways that were not entirely accidental. The version that was circulating said that Calum Voss was preparing legal action against his own family's estate management over fraudulent lease amendments, and that the bakery girl was involved, and that Mara Voss was fighting it. The bakery girl. That was what they called her. She had been called this for 2 years, the phrase a kind of comfortable erasure that kept her in a category without requiring anyone to use her name. She was aware of this. She had been aware of it for 2 years. She had, on some level, allowed it, because visibility of a certain kind can work against you when you are still preparing. She was no longer quite so interested in allowing it. The 7 people she had emailed became 9 by Thursday, because Paula had told someone she trusted, and that person had replied unprompted, and Daniel had told his business partner, who had his own story that he had been waiting to tell. 9 accounts, 9 names. 9 sets of dates and specifics that were now being gathered, carefully, by Ida McAllister, who was doing this as a private project and who was, as Lena had known she would be, very good at it. Lena went to Ida on Friday morning, which was March 4th, exactly 4 weeks after Calum had first come into the back of the bakery. She brought the second notebook and her phone, with the photographs of every page backed up in 2 places, and she sat across from Ida at the table in the small office on Croft Lane, which smelled of books and old paper and something that might have been good tea, and she gave Ida the notebook and watched her read. Ida read slowly. She made no sounds while she read. She turned the pages without rushing. She read everything. When she finished, she set the notebook down on the table, precisely, not carelessly, and she looked at Lena. She said, 7 years. Lena nodded. Ida said, "This is extraordinarily detailed." Lena took out the green notebook and wrote, "I knew someone would read it eventually. I didn't know who or when. I didn't want to get there and have something be unclear." Ida read the note. she said. It is very clear. She paused. Some of this will be useful to Calum's legal case. Some of it is outside that frame, but it is exactly what the Greyfield Omega Rights Network has been trying to build a case around for 3 years. Have you heard of them? Lena wrote. I printed flyers for them 2 years ago. Before I knew about Daniel's situation. Ida looked at her. She said, You printed their flyers? Lena nodded. Ida said, They've been trying to build a documented record of systemic disadvantage in Greyfield's employment and property decisions for 3 years. What you have is the most comprehensive personal record I've seen. She paused. May I contact them? Lena had thought about this. She had thought about it in the way she thought about most things, from multiple angles, with attention to sequence and consequence. She had thought, if the record becomes part of a network's case, it is no longer only hers. That was a loss of control. But it was also a kind of multiplication. Alone, her record was evidence of what happened to one Mute Omega in a mountain town. As part of a larger body of documentation, it was something else. She wrote, Yes, but I need to be the one who decides what gets used, and how, and when. Not because I don't trust them, because the record is mine. Ida said, That is completely reasonable. I'll make that clear. They sat together for 2 hours. Lena wrote and Ida asked questions, and Lena answered the questions with the precision she had been building for 7 years. And by the end of the 2 hours, there was a document on Ida's laptop that organized the record into a form that could be presented to the network, with Lena's conditions attached. She walked home along Croft Lane in the March morning. The frost was still on the grass on either side of the path, and the air was cold but different from February's cold, less sharp, more like cold with the memory of something warmer somewhere behind it. She walked and thought about the document on Ida's laptop. She had been carrying the second notebook for 7 years. Now part of what was in it was somewhere else, in a form that could do something. It felt strange, the way anything feels when you have been carrying it alone for a very long time, and then put some of it down. Not empty, different. She went to work. The bakery was busy on Friday. It was always busy on Friday, when people were in the mood of something being nearly done, the looseness of the end of a week. She moved through the morning with the focus she always brought, and the extra current of something running underneath it. Not visible to anyone, but there. Calum came in at the usual time, and she gave him the usual coffee and the almond tart, and then she wrote, without being asked, on the counter notepad, I went to Ida this morning. I gave her the notebook. He looked at this. He said, All of it? She nodded. He said, Was that hard? She thought. She wrote, No. It felt right. I think I was waiting for the right reason to do it. He read this carefully. He said, And was Ida the right reason? Or was something else? She looked at him. She wrote, Several things at the same time. That's usually how right reasons work. He looked at her for a moment. He said, What happens now? She wrote, Ida organizes the accounts. The network looks at the broader case. Your legal matter continues. Mara has no more property moves, and she knows it. He said, So she goes to people. She wrote, Already started. He said, What are they saying? She wrote, That you're using me, that I'm naive, that whatever is happening between us is not what it looks like. He said, And what do you say to that? She looked at him. She wrote, Nothing. I don't respond to things that aren't worth my words. He read it. He said, Good. She said nothing because she could not, and went back to the dough, and he read through his folder, and the Friday morning moved through its paces with the particular loudness of a busy end-of-week bakery. Voices, and the sound of cups, and the warm smell of everything, and the light coming through both windows now, east and west, the way it only fully came through both when the season was starting to change. Around 11, Fiona came in. She came in alone, without Caitlin, which was different. She ordered something small and stood at the front counter and did not move toward the door after Lena gave her the change. Lena waited. Fiona said, very quietly, I heard something. About what's being gathered, about the accounts. Lena looked at her. Fiona said, I have one too, an account. She paused. I've worked at the property office for 4 years. I've seen documents I wasn't supposed to see, and I didn't say anything, because I didn't know who to say it to. Another pause. I know what Mara had me do with the lease amendment. I didn't understand at the time what she was building it for. I do now. Lena picked up the notepad. She wrote, Ida McAllister, Croft Lane. She's expecting people. Fiona looked at the note. She said, Is it safe? Lena wrote, Yes. Fiona stood for a moment longer. She said, I know what Mara has said about you. For years. I'm sorry I didn't say something before. Lena wrote, You're saying something now. Fiona's expression went through something complicated that Lena did not try to categorize. Then she nodded and left. Lena stood at the counter. She looked at the notepad. 10 accounts now. Possibly 11, depending on what Fiona had seen in the property office documents. Fiona who had typed the lease amendment. Fiona who could explain exactly how it had been filed and why it had been filed that way, and who had instructed her to do it. The weight of what was accumulating was beginning to have a different quality. It was beginning to have the quality of something that could not be undone, or diminished, or managed around. She had not expected Fiona. She had never expected Fiona. She thought, people are sometimes more than you think they are. She thought, even people who've been standing in the wrong place for a long time. She went back to the ovens. She checked the bread. She pulled it out and set it to cool and stood in the warmth of it. The bakery smelled right. The light came through both windows. Owen arrived at noon with his usual slight breathlessness, and she showed him the new thing she had been working on, a laminated card system for the display case labels. More accessible, clearer, something she had been wanting to do for months and had finally written out last night. He looked at the cards. He said, These are great. She nodded. She put the cards in the case. She straightened them until they were level. She thought about the network. She thought about Ida. She thought about the 9+ Fiona people who were each carrying a piece of the same thing she had been carrying alone. She thought, we're not alone anymore. She had not thought that about anything in Greyfield in a very long time. She kept it for a moment, that thought, before putting it away. Then she went back to work. The afternoon moved forward. The light from the east window went amber again, the daily shift toward late afternoon, and the mountains outside caught it and held it, and the shadows came up the slopes the way they always did, slow and certain. She stood behind the counter, and she was exactly where she was. She was not waiting for anything. She was not preparing for anything. She was just here, in the bakery that was hers, in the town she had not left and was not going to leave, and the things that were in motion, and the things that were not yet done would be done. She had time. For the first time in years, she felt like she had time. She served the last customer of the afternoon. She wrote their order down. She made their change. She thanked them with her usual nod, the nod that meant you, and meant here, and meant done. They left. The door swung closed. She began the close-up routine. Counters, cases, equipment, lights. The same routine she did every evening, the familiar sequence of ending a day, and she did it with the same steadiness she brought to everything, step by step, until the bakery was ready for tomorrow. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She turned off the last light. She went home. The pool of light from the hardware store sign was there. Of course it was. It was always there. She looked at it. She went upstairs. Saturday brought the kind of March weather that could not decide if it was still February, gray at the edges and cold in the corners, but with a light that was unmistakably longer, unmistakably reaching. Lena opened the bakery at 5 and was halfway through the first batch when her phone buzzed with a message from a number she did not recognize. The message said, "You don't know me. My name is Beverly. I used to work at the county planning board. I left last year. Fiona gave me your email, through Ida McAllister. I have documents." Lena stopped what she was doing. She wrote back, "What kind of documents?" Beverly replied, "The kind that explain why certain planning applications were approved and certain others weren't, between 2019 and 2023, and why the people whose applications failed were all in specific categories." Lena stood at the prep table, with flour on her hands and her phone in one of them, and she could feel, with the certainty of someone who has been building something carefully for years, that the scale of the thing had just changed. She wrote, "Contact Ida McAllister directly today if possible." Beverly replied, "Already did. She said to tell you she's expecting a longer week than she planned." Lena put the phone in her apron pocket. She looked at the dough. She went back to shaping it, because bread did not wait, and she had orders to fill. and the morning was not going to pause for the fact that 7 years of one person's documentation had just connected itself to something significantly larger than she had initially understood it to be. She shaped the dough. Her hands were steady. Her mind was very clear. Calum arrived at 7. He came in and looked at her face and said, "What happened?" She wrote, "Planning board documents," from someone who worked there. Fiona connected her to Ida. He read it. He said, "How far does this go?" She wrote, "Further than I thought. I think what I kept was the visible part, the part that happened to one person in front of other people. What's coming out now is the part that happened in offices." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Does that change anything for you, about what you want to do with it?" She thought about this. She wrote, "No. It confirms it." He said, "Okay." He paused. "I need to tell Ida something. There are 2 members of the planning board who are also involved in the estate property dispute. The overlap is significant." She looked at him. She wrote, "You should tell her today." He said, "I'm going after breakfast." She nodded. She put his coffee in front of him. She went back to the batch. They worked in their parallel silence, her at the prep table, him at the counter, and the morning built around them the way it always did, with its rush and its quiet and its particular smell and its light, and she was aware of all of it. Fully, specifically, the way you are aware of things you know you are going to remember. She served the morning customers. She handled the register. She managed the questions and the orders with the shorthand she had built over 2 years, and each transaction was its own small exchange of the thing she made and the thing people needed, and it was good work. It had always been good work, and she thought as she worked, "This is mine. It has always been mine. No one is going to take it." It was a thought she had had before, in darker forms, in the survival version, the version that was about holding on. This was different. This was the declarative version, the version that was not about holding on but about being certain. There was a difference, and she felt it as something physical, a shift in posture, a kind of alignment. Calum left at 8. He looked back once at the door, and she met his look, and they did not exchange any particular expression. Just acknowledgement. Just "I see you," and "I am here," and then he was gone. The bakery was busy. She stayed in the work. At 10, Mara Voss came in. She came in alone. No Caitlin, no Fiona, no county women. Alone, in the coat she wore on formal occasions, which was dark blue and well cut, which meant she had thought about what she was wearing before she came here, which meant this visit was intentional and considered. She stood at the front counter, and she looked at Lena, and Lena looked back at her, and the bakery was quiet for a moment, in the way it is quiet between one thing and another. Mara said, "I'd like to talk to you." Lena wrote, "This is the counter. Talk." Mara looked at the note. A small muscle moved in her jaw. She said, "Not here. Somewhere private." Lena wrote, "There is nowhere private available. You can say what you came to say here, or not at all." Mara was still. She had always been still when she was working something out. Lena had watched this stillness for years. The calculation behind the surface. Mara said, "I know what you're doing. With Ida McAllister. With the accounts." Lena did not respond. She waited. Mara said, "I want you to know that I understand you feel you have been treated unfairly." Lena wrote on the notepad, in letters slightly larger than usual, "I don't feel it. It happened." Mara read the note. The muscle in her jaw moved again. She said, "These things are complicated. What looks one way from where you're standing looks different from." Lena wrote, "Stop." Mara stopped. Lena wrote, slowly and clearly, "You have spent 7 years doing specific and deliberate things to a specific person. I kept a record. Other people are adding to that record. You understand what it contains. If you came here to suggest that my perspective is limited, you should leave now." Mara read it. She was very still. Then she said, in a different voice, quieter, with something in it that Lena had never heard before, and which she categorized, carefully, as something genuine, trying to get through something managed. "My brother is pulling everything my family has built apart." Lena wrote, "He's correcting what was wrong. That's not the same thing." Mara said, "It feels like the same thing." Lena wrote, "I know you believe that." It was the most she was going to give. She knew it, and Mara knew it. They looked at each other across the counter of the bakery, and Lena thought, "This is 7 years. This is what 7 years looks like from the other side. Mara left without buying anything. She had not, Lena realized, come to buy anything. She had come to see whether there was something left to negotiate, and the answer was that there was not. Lena was not angry about the visit. She was not satisfied by it either. She was simply very clear, the way she was always clear, about what it meant and what it did not mean. She wrote the visit in the green notebook. Date, time, what was said. Then she put it away and went back to the counter. 4 more hours in the shift. She had bread to sell and change to make, and the Saturday crowd to manage, which was the largest crowd of the week and which she had never once not managed. She managed it. At the end of the day, when the bakery was empty and the cases were covered and the light had gone from both windows, she stood in the back room and she looked at the worn, smooth counter and the ovens and the space that was hers. She had built this. 2 years of daily precision, of showing up at 5 regardless of what had happened the day before, of serving every customer with the same care. She had built it, and it was solid. She put on her coat. She went home. She did not look at the second notebook that night. She did not need to. Caleb came to the bakery on Sunday with the folder and his coffee, and he sat at the counter for 3 hours, and then he said, "I need to tell you something." She set down what she was doing. He said, "About why I left Grayfield." She picked up the green notebook. She settled on the stool opposite him across the counter, and she held the pen, and she looked at him. He said, "I left because I was 21, and I was starting to understand what the family name meant in practice. Not in theory, not the way my father explained it, which was that the Voss name stood for stability and care, and the responsible management of things that mattered to people in the valley." A pause. I was starting to understand what it meant in the decisions that actually got made. And I was starting to understand that my father's version of the Voss name and the Voss name as it was actually operating were 2 different things. She listened. She did not write anything. He said, "I raised it once. With my father. I was 20, maybe. I had seen something specific, a planning decision, that went against a family who had been in the valley for 30 years, for reasons that made no sense unless you understood who had applied for the same land parcel and what their relationship to the Voss family was." He paused. "My father told me I was seeing things that weren't there, that this was the way systems worked, and that my responsibility was to the family and to the valley, and that I would understand this when I was older." He looked at his hands on the table. He said, "I was not older. I left. I built something in a city where my name meant nothing, and I had to actually do the work. I told myself I was being principled. I told myself that removing myself from a corrupt system was a moral act." He looked up. "I was 21, and I was telling myself a story that was comfortable, and I did not think, once, for 9 years, about the people in that valley, who were still living in the system I had walked away from." The bakery was quiet around them. Sunday morning, early still, the regulars not yet arrived. She wrote, "You couldn't have changed anything at 21. He said, "I know." She wrote, "And you're here now." He said, "I know that too. I know both of those things are true at the same time. I'm not asking for forgiveness for leaving. I'm telling you why I left. I'm telling you, because I've been sitting across this counter from you for 5 weeks, and I've watched you manage what my family built and what my absence enabled, and I want you to have the full picture, not a partial one." She held the pen for a moment. Then she wrote, "Why does it matter that I have it?" He looked at the question. He said, "Because I don't want you to discover something later that makes what I've said or done look different. I'd rather be complete now." She wrote, "What would make you look different?" He said, "The fact that I benefit from the legal case, the property transfers benefit me, not just because they were wrong, but because the reversal adds significant value to the estate. If you're trying to understand what I'm doing, and why, that's part of it. It's not the whole of it. But it's there." She held this. She turned it over in her careful mind. She wrote, "I know." He looked at her. She wrote, "I know. I worked out 3 weeks ago that you benefit from the reversals. I was waiting to see if you'd tell me. You have now." He was quiet. She wrote, "The fact that something benefits you doesn't make it wrong. The things being reversed were wrong. You're reversing them. The 2 things exist at the same time." He said, "I wasn't sure you'd see it that way." She wrote, "You were testing me." He said, I was hoping you would surprise me. She wrote, did I? He said, you've surprised me every day since I walked in for coffee. She looked at him. She was aware, with the precision she brought to all awareness, that they were in a different conversation now than the one they had been in for 5 weeks, that the conversation had passed through something, a threshold of some kind, and that what was on this side of it was not the same as what had been on the other. She wrote, very carefully, I need to tell you something too. He waited. She wrote, when you came in the first morning, I noticed you in the way I notice things. I did not think you would be relevant to me. I categorized you as passing through, and then you kept coming back. He said, yes. She wrote, I don't let people become relevant easily. It has costs. I've worked out the costs very carefully over years, and most of the time the calculation doesn't come out in favor of it. He said, I know. I've watched you do it. She wrote, and I've been watching you not push. Every morning for 5 weeks. You could have asked me things you didn't ask. You could have moved faster. You didn't. He said, it wasn't strategic. I just understood it wasn't my pace to set. She looked at him for a long moment. She wrote, that is the most important thing anyone has said to me in years. He was still. He did not look away. She wrote, I don't know what to do with you. I mean that in the most practical sense. I have a life here that is very specifically arranged. I have a bakery, and an apartment, and a route I walk every morning in the dark, and a system, and a record, and 2 notebooks, and I have been fine. He said, you have been more than fine. She wrote, I have been fine. And now there is something I need to figure out how to put into that, and I don't know how yet. He said, that's all right. She wrote, it might take a while. He said, I'll be here at 7. She looked at him. She wrote, you might need to stay in Grayfield for that to work. He said, I know. She wrote, is that something you're considering? He said, I've been considering it since the 2nd week. I didn't bring it up because I didn't want you to feel like it was a pressure. She wrote, does it feel like a pressure to say it now? He said, does it feel like a pressure to hear it? She thought about this. She thought about it with the full attention she gave to things that mattered. Then she wrote, no. It feels like information. I'm good with information. He said, I know. She looked at the counter between them. She looked at the flower that was always somewhere on its surface, and the small notepad by the register, and the pen that was always nearby. She looked at his coffee cup, which was empty, which meant she should refill it, but she did not refill it yet. She wrote, I'm going to need more time. He said, take it. She wrote, not because I don't know what I think, because knowing what I think, and knowing what to do with it, are different steps. He said, I understand. She wrote, you'd better. He looked at the note. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. She got up and refilled his coffee. He stayed another hour. They did not say anything significant for the rest of it. She worked and he read his papers, and Owen came in for the tail end of the morning shift and set about the restocking without being asked, which meant he was getting there, Owen, getting to the place where he knew the rhythm, without being told. When Calum left, he paused at the back door and said, for what it's worth, I came to Grayfield to deal with the estate, and I intend to deal with it, and I had no particular plan beyond that. He paused. That has changed. I'm not saying that to create an obligation. I'm saying it because I told you I'd be complete. She wrote, I know. I go. He went. She stood at the prep table for a moment. She was aware of her heart doing something that she generally did not pay attention to it doing, because the heart was not a reliable instrument for making decisions, and she had learned this. But she was aware of it. She let herself be aware. Then she went to the dough. The Sunday morning thinned into Sunday afternoon. She finished the shift. She walked home. She made tea. She sat at the window. She did not take the second notebook out. She had not needed to take it out in days. It was still there, under the bed, complete, and it was doing its work through Ida McAllister now, and she was glad about that, the way you are glad when a thing you carried alone is being carried by more hands. She thought about the conversation. She thought about, it wasn't strategic. I just understood it wasn't my pace to set. She thought about that for a while. She looked at the pool of light from the hardware store sign, which was there as it always was, which she had been looking at from this window for 2 years. which had been the small, reliable fixed point of a great many evenings. She thought, things are going to change now. She thought, I think I'm ready for that. She went to bed early. She had bread to make tomorrow. She had always had bread to make tomorrow. That was not changing. That was one of the things that was staying exactly as it was. She closed her eyes. She was very close to something. She could feel the shape of it, the way you feel a word on the tip of your tongue, not quite arrived but almost. Not quite here but coming. She would know it when it came. She slept. The next week was unlike anything Lena had lived through in Grayfield before, and she had lived through 7 years of a great deal. On Monday, Ida McAllister filed the formal submission to the Grayfield Omega Rights Network, which was a 3-page document with 17 supporting accounts attached, of which Lena's was the first and most detailed but not the only substantial one. The submission described a pattern of coordinated disadvantage across property, employment, and social access in the Grayfield Valley over a period of approximately 8 years. On Tuesday, 2 more people contacted Ida directly, having heard through the network of what was being gathered. One was a woman named Carrie, who had been denied renewal of her food vendor license 3 years ago and had been unable to get a clear reason why. The other was a man named Grant who had applied for a council business development grant twice and been rejected both times, and who had subsequently discovered that a competitor, with significantly less documented need, had received both grants in the same cycle, for reasons that the council minutes did not clearly explain. On Wednesday, the Grayfield Omega Rights Network posted a statement on their website. It did not name Mara Voss. It did not name anyone. It described the submission and its scope, and stated that the network was working with a legal advocate to determine the appropriate next steps. It asked that others with relevant experience contact the network through the provided channels. Lena read the statement on her phone on her break, standing in the back of the bakery with a roll she had been meaning to eat for an hour. The statement was careful. It was very precise. It was, she thought, exactly right. She sent Ida a 3-word email, "This is right." Ida replied, "Thank you for trusting the process." Lena put the phone down and ate the roll, which was good, which it always was because she made it, and she was consistent, and she thought, all of this happened because I kept writing. On Wednesday afternoon, Calum came in, with the expression she now recognized as the controlled one that covered something significant. He sat at the counter and said, "The estate legal matter has a hearing date, March 21st. She wrote, 2 weeks. He said, "Yes. Ida is representing that side too. She's been very efficient." She wrote, "She's very good." "Is Mara contesting the hearing?" He said, "She's run out of grounds to contest on. Her solicitor told her as much, apparently. I heard this through the family solicitor who's been managing the estate documents, who is not someone Mara chose, and who has been cooperative." He paused. "She knows she's going to lose the hearing." Lena wrote, "What does that mean for her?" He said, "It means the property transfers are reversed. It means the estate is managed according to the actual will, which was more balanced than what was being executed." He paused. "It means she loses a significant amount of control. But she doesn't lose everything. The family home stays in the family. Her personal assets are not affected. She's not in legal trouble over the property, because Ida believes the documentation suggests she understood it was problematic but can't prove intent to defraud." He looked at the counter. "She'll be fine. Materially. Just significantly less powerful here." Lena wrote, "Will she stay in Grayfield?" He said, "I don't know. That's her decision." She wrote, "And you, after the 21st? He looked at her directly. He said, "I'm not leaving." She wrote, "Are you certain?" He said, "I am." She wrote, "Why?" He said, "Because I have something to be here for." She looked at him. She held his gaze for a long moment, and in the moment, there was the bakery and the counter and the light through the east window and 7 years of a particular kind of life and whatever was coming on the other side of that. And she was aware of all of it simultaneously, the way you are aware of everything at once when you are at the edge of a change. She wrote, "That answer is going to require a longer conversation." He said, "I know, we have time." She wrote, "Yes, we do." She went back to the prep table. He stayed at the counter. Owen arrived for the afternoon. The bakery ran itself through the rest of the day in its usual way, and the light did what it did, and Lena worked, and she thought. She thought about time. She thought about having it. It was not something she had thought about before in this way. Time had always been the distance between one thing and the next difficult thing, the gap to be managed and endured. It had not been something to look forward to plan in, to imagine moving through at any pace other than the one required. She thought, having time is different from having enough time. Enough time is survival. Having time is something else. She shaped the last batch of the day. She slid it into the oven. She set the timer. She stood in the warm kitchen, and she thought, I am going to be all right. Not for the first time in her life, exactly, but for the first time with this specific quality to it, not the grim compact of survival, but the open space of something that actually had possibilities in it. She breathed. She waited for the bread. It came out right. It always came out right, because she was careful and consistent, and she had been doing it long enough to trust herself. She pulled it out. She set it to cool. She put her apron on its hook. She went home. She did not look at the second notebook. She sat at the table and wrote in the green one instead, the daily one, the one for everything that happened and needed to be put somewhere. She wrote about the week. She wrote about the hearing date. She wrote about Ida and the network and 17 accounts. She wrote, briefly, about the conversation at the counter and the question she had not yet fully answered. Then she wrote, at the bottom of the page, in the space she sometimes used for the things that were not quite articulated yet, I think this is what the record was for. Not just to document the bad things, to be the beginning of the better things, having somewhere to start from. She read it back. It was not elegant. It was not the kind of thing she would say to anyone. But it was true, and true things did not have to be elegant. They just had to be true. She closed the notebook. She went to bed. Outside, March was doing what March did, beginning, slowly, to become something other than winter. The frost was still there in the mornings, but it was thinner. The dark was still there at 5, but it was shorter. The mountains were the same mountains they had always been, and she knew where they were without having to see them, and tomorrow she would see them in the early morning light, which was changing by minutes, and the change was good. She slept. The Alpha Convocation was not something Lena had ever attended. She had walked past its venue, the Grayfield Hall on the main street, on the March evenings when it was held each year, and she had seen the lights through the tall windows and heard the controlled sound of a room full of people operating at their most formal, and she had continued walking, because the convocation was for Alpha-ranked families and the people affiliated with them, and she was neither. The March convocation was the most significant one of the year. It was where the Valley's Alpha families gathered to make the annual public statements about their plans and their positions, and their stewardship of the various things they claimed to be stewards of. It was, in the plainest terms, the event where the social architecture of Grayfield was reaffirmed once a year, in a room where everyone was wearing their best, and everyone knew what everyone else's presence or absence meant. Lena had no plan to go to it. She was at the bakery on the convocation evening, the 19th of March, doing prep for the next day, which she sometimes did on evenings when she needed the rhythm of it, more than she needed the rest. Owen had gone home. Mr. Peel had stopped in briefly to say that the lease challenge from Grayfield Valley Property Management had been formally dropped, 2 days before the estate hearing, which meant Mara had conceded the property angle entirely. He had said this with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had said no to the right people and been proven right about it, and then he had gone home. The bakery was empty and the lights were on, and it smelled the way it always smelled at this hour, warm and settled, and Lena was shaping dough for the morning, just the two of them, the dough and her hands, which was the relationship she trusted most in Grayfield. Her phone buzzed. A message from Calum. "Are you at the bakery?" She replied, "Yes." He replied, "I'm at the hall. The convocation. I have to be here for the estate matter. There's something happening I think you should see." She looked at the message. She looked at the dough. She covered the dough with a cloth and washed her hands. She put on her coat. She had never walked into the Grayfield Hall. She had walked past it perhaps 200 times. She did not hesitate at the door, because hesitation was a form of asking permission, and she had decided years ago to stop asking permission for things she had as much right to as anyone. She went in. The hall was large and lit warmly and full of people, perhaps 150 of them, arranged in the specific configuration of an event that had a room hierarchy, the senior families toward the front, the affiliated and the employed toward the back and the sides. The whole thing organized by invisible rules that everyone present understood and no one would have explained out loud. There were tables with white cloths and wine, and the good crystal that came out for the convocation, and at the front, there was a raised area where the family's representatives stood and made their statements. She was in the back of the room before anyone registered her. She was good at arriving in spaces. She had been good at it for years. She found Calum near the left side of the hall, standing slightly separate from the main cluster, with the posture of someone who is present but not fully of the room. He looked at her when she came to stand beside him, and he did not look surprised, which meant he had expected her to come, which meant he had sent the message knowing she might. She looked at the front of the room. Mara was at the senior family table, in the dark blue coat, with the expression of someone who has decided that whatever happens tonight, she will look as though it was her intention all along. Beside her were two members of the county council. The assembled room was doing what it always did at these events, which was presenting itself in the careful way of people who understood that they were being watched, and who had arranged themselves accordingly. She looked at Calum. She wrote on the notepad she had brought, "What is happening?" He said quietly, "I'm going to make the family statement. I've never done it before. My father always did it, and then Mara did. But I am the primary holder of the Voss name now. I have the standing." He paused. The statement is traditionally about the family's plans and commitments for the year. "I've been thinking about what I want to say." She wrote, "What are you going to say?" He looked at her. He said, "I'm going to start with the estate. The hearing is in 2 days. I'm going to be clear about what was done incorrectly and what is being corrected. I'm going to name it plainly." She wrote, "In this room." He said, "Yes." She looked at the room. She looked at the 150 people, the good crystal, the white cloths, the careful arrangements. She looked at Mara's profile at the senior table. She wrote, "They're going to look at you." He said, "I know." She wrote, "And at me." He said, "Yes." She wrote, "That's why you asked if I was at the bakery. You wanted me here." He said, "I wanted you here if you wanted to be here. I wasn't going to ask you to come. I just told you what was happening." She thought about the distinction. She wrote, "You understood I would come if I thought I should." He said, "Yes." She looked at the front of the room. She looked at the raised area where the statements were made. She looked at the hall around her, which was not her hall, which had never been her hall, which she had walked past 200 times and never entered. She wrote, "Go make your statement." He moved toward the front of the room. She watched him go. She stood in the back near the left wall, and she watched the room watch him arrive at the raised area, and she saw the moment when the room registered that he was going to speak, and she saw it recalibrate, the way 150 people recalibrate simultaneously when something unexpected is about to happen. He stood at the front. The room went quiet. He said, "I'll keep this short. I've been back in Greyfield for 6 weeks. In that time I've dealt with a legal situation involving the estate that required the involvement of a solicitor and which has a hearing in 2 days. I want to be transparent about it here, before that hearing, because this is the room where the Valley's families make their positions clear, and this is my position." He paused. There were property transfers and lease amendments made under the Voss family name that were not properly executed. Some were signed without appropriate authority. Some were filed with county documentation that did not reflect the actual terms. We are correcting these. Several of them affected people in this valley who had done nothing wrong. They deserve the correction. He did not look at Mara when he said this. He looked at the room. The room was very quiet. He said, "I also want to say something that isn't about the legal matter. It's about Greyfield. I grew up here, and I left it, and I've been back 6 weeks, and I've been watching how it works. There are people in this valley who carry things that they shouldn't have to carry. There are people who have worked hard and been told, in various ways, that the work isn't enough, because of what they are, or what they're ranked, or who they're not. I've seen the record of it. I mean that literally. I've read the document." He paused. "We built this valley together. All of it. Not just the families in this room. Every person who runs a business, and every person who bakes the bread, and every person who works in the pharmacy, and keeps the records, and drives the roads, and does the things that make a place actually function. All of them." The room was entirely still. He looked toward the back of the hall. He looked at her. He said, Lena Holt has lived in Grayfield her whole life. She works at the bakery on the main street. She hasn't spoken since she was 11 years old, and she has more to say than anyone I've met in 6 weeks, or probably longer. He paused. She kept a record for 7 years, of what she went through and what was done to her and what was done to other people, quietly, by a system that counted on them not having a way to be heard. She found a way. She found several ways. Lena stood at the back of the room. She did not move. She was aware of the room turning toward her in the way that rooms turn when a name has been said, the slow collective rotation of attention, and she was aware that she was in the back near the left wall, with her coat on, and her notebook in her hand, and flour still faintly present on her knuckles despite the washing, because there was always flour. She stood straight. She looked at the front. Calum said, I'm not speaking for her. I couldn't. She's better at it than I am. He paused. I'm just telling this room what I know, because this room decides what Grayfield is, and I want this room to know what I've seen. Then he stepped down from the raised area. He walked back through the room. He walked back through the silence that had the quality not of emptiness, but of a great deal being processed simultaneously by a great many people, and he walked back to where she was standing, and he stopped beside her. He did not say anything. She did not write anything. They stood together at the back of the hall while the room found itself again, and then the murmur began, and then the room was fully alive again, but it was different. She could feel it. It was a different room from the one she had walked into 12 minutes ago. She looked at him. He looked at her. She wrote, You said she. You called me she. He said, You're right. I should have asked what you preferred first. She wrote, She is fine. It's fine. He said, Are you all right? She thought about all right. She thought about what all right meant, in a room she had never been in before, having just heard her own name said at the front of it, by someone who had looked at the record and called it what it was. She wrote, Yes. He said, Do you want to leave? She wrote, No. She looked at the room again. She saw Clara Briggs, who came to the convocation because her sister was married to someone Alpha-affiliated, and Clara was looking at her with an expression that was not pity, and was not confusion. It was something like recognition, the recognition of a person who has seen something for the first time that they realize they should have seen before. She saw Daniel from the print shop, who was here for reasons she did not know but who caught her eye, and nodded, once, with the nod of someone who had received her email and who understood. She saw Mara. Mara was not looking at her. Mara was looking at the table in front of her, very still, very controlled. The woman beside her said something quietly. Mara nodded without looking up. Lena looked at her for a moment. She had looked at Mara Voss from a distance for 7 years, from a different angle each time, from behind a bakery counter, from a pavement outside, from a stall at a market, from a storage room, from below, always, from the place of someone who was not supposed to be looking directly. She was looking directly now. She looked for about 4 seconds. Then she looked away, not because she was afraid or because Mara had power over her, but because she was done. She had seen what she needed to see, and it was enough. She looked at Calum. He was watching her. She wrote, What happens now? He said, Whatever you want. She wrote, At the hearing? He said, Ida is ready. The case is solid. We win. She wrote, And after? He said, That's the part we haven't planned yet. She looked at the hall. She looked at the room that she had never been in before, that was full of people who were now aware of her name and of the record and of the years of precise documentation and of the fact that she had been in the back near the left wall this whole time, without their permission or their notice or their invitation, just standing there, the way she had always been there. She wrote, on the last blank space of the page she was on, I'd like to plan it. The after. He read it. He said, When you're ready. She wrote, Ask me again in a month. He said, I will. She wrote, I know. She put the notebook in her pocket. She stood in the hall for a while longer, not speaking, not needing to speak, because she had a notebook and she had a record, and she had a bakery, and she had a name that had just been said in this room, and she was 19 years old and had flour on her knuckles, and she was the most present she had been in a very long time. Then she walked out. She did not walk out because she needed to go. She walked out because she chose to, which was different, and the difference was everything. She went back to the bakery. She finished the prep for the morning. She shaped the last of the dough and covered it and washed her hands and turned off the lights. She walked home in the March night. The frost was thin, the dark was shorter. The mountains were somewhere in the sky above the town, invisible but present. She went upstairs. She sat at the window. The pool of light from the hardware store sign was there. She looked at it, the way she always looked at it, her nightly reckoning. Tonight it looked the same as it always looked, and it was also completely different. She sat with that for a while. Then she went to bed. She did not sleep easily, not because of fear, because of the specific wide-awake quality of someone whose nervous system had absorbed a great deal in one evening and was not quite done processing it. She lay in the dark and went through it. The hall, the room. His voice at the front of it saying her name. The room turning. Mara at the table. Clara's recognition. Daniel's nod. The walkout. She thought about what it meant that she had gone. She thought about what it meant that she had stood at the back near the left wall, and not moved, and not looked away, and not made herself small. She had stood, she had been present, she had been known, in that room, in a way she had never been known in Greyfield before, and she had not collapsed under it, and she had not run from it, and she had not been frightened by it. She had known she would not be frightened by it. She had known for years, in the abstract, that if the moment came, she would stand in it. But knowing a thing in the abstract and then standing in the moment and finding the abstract was true was a different kind of knowing. She thought, I stood. She thought, that was mine. I did that. She slept eventually, somewhere after midnight, and the sleep was deep and uninterrupted, the sleep of someone who has put something down that they had been carrying for a very long time. She woke at 4:30. She was at the bakery at 5. She opened the lights in the ovens and put on her apron and began. At 6, before the first customer, she took out the green notebook and wrote down everything she remembered about the evening. She wrote it in the format of the record, because the format was precise, and she wanted to be precise about this. Date, time, location, what was said, who was present, what happened. She wrote it, and it was real, and it was hers. She put the notebook in her apron. The first customer came through the door. She was ready. The morning came and went. At 7, Calum came in, and there was something settled in his face, the quality of someone who slept well on the night of a difficult thing, because the difficult thing went as it needed to go. He sat at the counter. She put the coffee in front of him without being asked. He said, "Are you all right? After last night?" She wrote, "Yes." He said, "Good." She wrote, "You should have told me you were going to say my name." He looked at the note. He said, "You're right. I should have asked." He paused. "I was afraid you would say no." She wrote, "I would have said yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know. I was afraid anyway." She looked at him. She wrote, "Why?" He said, "Because it mattered. The things that matter most are the things you're most afraid of getting wrong." She held the pen. She wrote, "You didn't get it wrong." He said, "No?" She wrote, "No." He exhaled. A quiet sound, the sound of something that had been held for a while being released. He drank his coffee. She worked. The morning ran its course. At the end of his coffee, before he left for the day's work, he said, "The hearing is in 2 days." She nodded. He said, "After the hearing, when things settle, I'd like to take you somewhere." "Not in Greyfield, outside of it." He paused. "There's a place in the valley, an hour from here, where you can see 4 different peaks simultaneously from a single point. I found it when I was 17, and I haven't been back. I'd like to show it to you." She looked at him. She thought about 4 peaks from one point. She thought about the mountains she could not see from the bakery window, that she knew were there. She wrote, "After the hearing." He said, "After the hearing." She nodded. He left. The morning continued. She had bread to bake, and people to serve, and a life to run. And all of it was exactly as it had always been, and also entirely different, the way things are, when the thing running underneath them has finally broken the surface and become part of what everyone can see. She worked. She was still here. She had always been here. The difference was that now she was visible in it, which was what she had chosen. and the choice was hers, which was what mattered most. The hearing was on a Thursday, the 21st of March, and Lena went to it. She had not told anyone she was going. She had not discussed it with Calum, or with Ida, or with Mr. Peel, or with Owen. She simply finished her morning shift, removed her apron, walked 3 blocks to the county annex building, where the estate hearing was being held, and went in. The hearing room was smaller than she had imagined, a room that was mostly functional, with a table and chairs and a window that looked out onto the side of another building, and it had none of the drama of the hall at the convocation. It was a working room. It smelled of paper and old carpet, and the slight mustiness of a building that was heated by a system that was not quite adequate. Ida was there, with her folders arranged with the precision that Lena had come to associate with her, the precision of someone who had been doing this for decades and who still cared about doing it right. Calum was there, in a jacket and tie, which was the most formally dressed she had ever seen him, and he looked composed, in the way of someone who has been preparing for a thing for long enough that the preparation has become its own kind of certainty. Mara was there with her solicitor, a man who had the careful posture of someone managing a case he privately knew he was going to lose. There was a hearing officer, a woman named Mrs. Dyer, who looked at everyone once as she took her seat, and then began moving through the documents with the focus of someone who was interested only in the facts. Lena sat in the row of chairs at the edge of the room. No one had reserved these chairs for anyone. She sat in one because it existed and was empty, and she was a person who could sit in a chair. The hearing lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. It was not dramatic. It was very precise. Ida presented the documentation. The irregularities in the property transfers were named and identified. The lease amendments were named and identified. The county planning applications that were connected to the estate were named and identified. Mrs. Dyer asked questions. Ida answered them. Calum answered the ones directed to him. Mara's solicitor offered objections that Mrs. Dyer noted and then set aside with the specific efficiency of someone who could see exactly where the weight of the evidence sat. At the end, Mrs. Dyer said, without particular emotion, because it was a professional opinion, not a personal one, that the estate documentation showed evidence of irregular execution, that the property transfers in question would be reviewed for reversal, that the planning matter would be referred to the county oversight office, and that all involved parties would receive written decisions within 30 days. It was done. Lena sat in her chair and looked at the table and the folders and the window that looked out onto the side of another building, and she thought, it's done. Not everything. The 30 days of written decisions. The network's case, which was its own parallel thing. The county planning referral, which would go through its own process. There was more to come. But this piece, the specific piece that had started 7 weeks ago, when Calum Voss walked in for coffee and read 2 words from her fallen notebook and handed it back without keeping it, this piece was done. Mara and her solicitor left first. Mara did not look at Lena as she passed, not deliberately, just did not look. Lena watched her go. She thought, it's over. And she thought, for her it must feel like it's just beginning. The next part. The part where she decides what to do with less. She thought, that is not my problem. Ida packed her folders. Calum came to where Lena was sitting. He looked at her. He did not say anything, because the thing that had just happened did not need narration from either of them, and they both knew it. She wrote on the notepad, "You're in a tie." He looked down at the tie. He said, "I put it on this morning, and felt like a stranger in my own clothes." She wrote, "You should change." He said, "I intend to." She wrote, "How long until you feel like yourself again?" He said, "I've been feeling more like myself every morning at 7, for the past 6 weeks. She held the pen. She looked at him. She wrote, in the clear small letters she always used when she was being precise, "I want to go see the 4 peaks." He said, "Now." She wrote, "Not now. It's a work day. Saturday." He said, "Saturday." She wrote, "If the weather is good." He said, "What if the weather isn't good?" She wrote, "Then the Sunday after." He said, "And if it rains for a week?" She wrote, "Then we wait for it to stop, and then we go." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All right." She nodded. They walked out of the hearing room. They walked through the county annex building and out the front door into the March morning, which was cold but different again from the day before. One of those days in late March where the cold is still real, but something underneath it has shifted. a warmth gathering under the surface of things like water, getting ready to rise. She looked up at the sky, clear. She wrote, "The weather is good." He looked up at the sky. He looked at her. He said, "It's a workday." She wrote, "It is." He said, "And the bakery?" She wrote, "Mr. Peel knows the afternoon schedule. Owen can manage 3 hours." He said, "You planned this." She looked at him. She wrote, "I am a very organized person." He said, "You plan to come to the hearing and then take the afternoon." She wrote, "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "You never stop." She wrote, "No." He laughed, an actual laugh, not the short surprised one she had first gotten from him in the bakery. Something fuller. She put that laugh somewhere she would remember it. She sent Owen a message. "Can you handle the afternoon?" She would owe him one. He would know that. And Owen would do it without complaint, because Owen was learning things about how workplaces ran, when the person running them treated you decently, and that knowledge was worth something. Owen replied, "Yes." "Go." She showed the reply to Calum. He read it. He said, "Where are we going first?" She wrote, "You tell me it's your secret spot." He said, "It's an hour east, through the valley road." She wrote, "Then we go east." They went east. The road through the valley was the same road she had walked 100 times, in the direction of the mountain trails, but further than she had taken it, further than the trailheads, deeper into the valley, where the road became a single lane, and the trees came close on both sides, and the mountains moved into view differently, from below, rather than from the town's flat elevation, so that they were larger and more immediate, the scale of them changing as you drove toward them. She sat in the passenger seat and watched through the window. She had not been in a car much. She owned no car. She moved through Grayfield on foot because everything she needed was within walking distance, and the mountains she walked were reachable from the trailheads on foot. Being a passenger was different. The landscape moved differently when you were not the one moving through it. She liked it. The particular passivity of watching things come toward you, the way each curve of the road revealed something she had not seen before, the valley deeper and longer than she had known, the peaks showing different angles as the road turned. He drove without music. She had not asked for it, and he had not offered it, and the silence was the good kind, the kind that had content in it without needing to be filled. After 40 minutes he pulled off the road, onto a track she had not seen, not quite wide enough for the car, but wide enough, and they went up the track for another 10 minutes, until it ended, at a place where the trees thinned, and the ground leveled and opened. She got out. She looked up. 4 peaks, not in a line, not arranged conveniently, but spread across the arc of the sky, in the way that things are spread when no one arranged them for your convenience, in the real way of geography. One to the north, very close and very high, its upper section still snow-capped, the line between rock and snow precise in the March air. One to the northeast, further, gentler in shape. One to the east, the tallest, the one she had always been able to see from Grayfield when the air was clear. But from here, the whole of it was visible, not just the peak, but the whole ridge. And one to the southeast, lower than the others but with a shape she had not seen before, a double crest that from any other angle she had ever taken would have looked like a single peak. She stood and looked at all 4 of them. She had been looking at the mountains her whole life. She had been looking at the edges of them, at the portions visible from the town, at the angles she could access from the trailheads. She had thought she knew what she was looking at. She had not known this. She took out the green notebook. She did not write anything. She just held it. Calum stood beside her. He looked up at the same sky. He said, quietly, "When I found this at 17, I stayed for 3 hours. I didn't tell anyone. It felt like mine." She wrote, "Why are you showing it to me?" He said, "Because I want you to have things that are good, and this is one of the best things I have." She held the notebook. She looked at the 4 peaks. She thought about good things. She thought about what she had, and what she was going to have, and what was already there that she had not been allowing herself to fully feel. She thought, "This is mine now too." She wrote, "Thank you for finding this when you were 17. He read it. He said, "Thank you for still being here when I came back." She looked at him. She wrote, "I wasn't waiting for you." He said, "I know." She wrote, "But I'm glad you came back anyway." He said, "So am I." They stood in the open space between the trees, and the mountains were all around them, and the sky was clear and cold, and the light was the long light of late March, that had finally fully become something more than winter, that had finally arrived at the threshold of something else, and Lena stood in it and breathed. She thought about the record. She thought about 7 years of notebooks and 7 years of precise documentation, and all the things she had carried, and all the ways she had found to carry them. She thought about the accounts gathering with Ida, about Paula and Daniel and Nina and Beverly and Fiona, about the network and the referral and the 30 days of written decisions to come. She thought about Mr. Peel and the lease and Owen and the afternoon shift and the roles that Ida McAllister came in for every Friday. She thought about the bakery and its 2 windows and the stripe of light that crossed the display case at 7:23 and the dough that waited for her at 5 every morning. She thought about all of it, and then, standing in the clear cold air with 4 peaks visible above her, she thought about something else instead. She thought about what came next. She had been thinking about what came next in the defensive way, the way of someone managing what was coming. She had not, in a long time, thought about it in the open way, the way of someone who had the space to want things. She thought about the bakery expanding. She had been thinking about this in a practical way for months. The second room that Mr. Peel had never used, the one at the back of the building that had been storage for years. She had been thinking about what it could be. A prep kitchen, properly equipped. The capacity to take on more catering work. A small table, maybe 2, for the people who wanted to sit rather than take away. She thought about the Omega Rights Network submission. She thought about what it might become, and what it might change, and what it might mean for the people in Grayfield, who had been carrying what she had been carrying. And she thought about the possibility that the record might be the beginning of something, rather than just the documentation of something. She thought about 4 peaks from one point. She thought about small and clear handwriting. She thought about okay. She looked at Calum. He was looking at the northeast peak, the gentler one, with the expression of someone who is home, in a specific way, the way you are home, in a place that has cost you something, where the homecoming has weight to it, because the absence had weight. She wrote, "Are you going to stay?" He said, "Yes." She wrote, "For the estate, or for something else?" He looked at her. He said, "For something else." She wrote, "Tell me what you want." He said, "I want to figure out what it means to be part of something here. In the valley. Not the Voss family management of the valley. Something else. Something worth doing." He paused. "I don't know exactly what that looks like yet." She wrote, "You have time." He said, "We have time." She looked at the 4 peaks. She thought, "Yes, we do." She wrote, "I have conditions." He said, "Tell me." She wrote, "I keep the bakery. No one manages it but me." He said, "Of course." She wrote, "I keep both notebooks. The green one and the dark one. They are mine." He said, "They will always be yours." She wrote, "I decide the pace of everything. I'm not going to have someone else's pace set on top of mine again." He said, "I will never set your pace for you. I've had 6 weeks of practice at this." She wrote, "And if I write something in the notebook that you weren't expecting, you read it, and you answer it. You don't deflect it." He said, "I will read it and answer it." She wrote, "I'm serious about that last one." He said, "I know, I'm serious too." She held the notebook. She held the pen. She looked at the mountains. She looked at him. She wrote, in the last space on the page she was on, "Then ask me again in a month, and I'll give you an answer." He read it. He said, "That's the same thing you said at the convocation." She wrote, "I know." He said, "A month from which point?" She wrote, "From now." He looked at her. He looked at the mountains. He said, "All right." She nodded. They stood in the open for a long time, long enough for the light to shift, for the shadows to begin their slow climb up the faces of the nearer peaks, for the air to sharpen slightly with the approach of late afternoon. She did not write anything else, and he did not say anything else, and the silence between them was the best kind of silence, the kind that was not absence but presence, the full and settled kind, the kind that meant there was nothing missing. On the drive back, she watched the valley reverse itself through the window, the peaks receding, the road widening, the trees thinning back to the familiar shapes of the road toward town. She watched all of it and she thought, this is mine now. I've seen it. It's in me. She had been collecting things like this her whole life. The mountains from the trail, the stripe of light through the east window, the pool of light from the hardware store sign, the way bread smelled when it was right. Small things that were hers, that asked nothing from her, that simply existed for her to hold. She had a new one now, 4 peaks from one point. She carried it home. She worked the close-up shift at the bakery. She thanked Owen, who had handled the afternoon without complaint, and who had, she noted with satisfaction, reorganized the upper shelf in exactly the way she would have organized it if she had been there, which meant he had been paying proper attention. She did the close-up routine. Counters, cases, equipment, lights. She did it in the particular satisfaction of someone who knows exactly what they are doing and does not need to think about the steps. She put on her coat, she picked up her bag, she turned off the last light. She walked home. The pool of light from the hardware store sign was there. She looked at it. She had been looking at this light for 2 years, in the way that you look at a fixed point when you need to know where you are. She had needed to know where she was for a long time, and this small, reliable light had been one of the ways she had known. She looked at it and she thought, I know where I am. She thought, this is the town I grew up in. This is the town I stayed in. This is the town that tried to make me smaller, and failed, because I kept writing. This is the town that is changing, in its slow way, the way towns change, pushed from inside by the people who live in them. She thought, this is mine. She went upstairs, she put the kettle on, she sat at the table with the green notebook and the pen, and she wrote about the day, the hearing, the 4 peaks, the drive, the afternoon light on the mountains. She wrote about what she wanted. She had never written about what she wanted before, not in the forward-looking way, not with anything other than the defensive precision of someone managing what was coming. She wrote about it now, in the open way, in the way of someone who had enough space in front of them to want things. She wrote about the bakery expanding, about the second room and the prep kitchen and the 2 tables and the capacity for more. She wrote about the network and the record and what it could become. She wrote about the month that was going to pass and the conversation that was going to happen at the end of it, and what she was going to say. She knew what she was going to say. She had known since she stood between the 4 peaks and looked at the mountains and let herself have them. She wrote it down. She put the notebook away. She made her tea. She sat at the window. She looked at the pool of light. Tomorrow the bakery would open at 5. The dough was prepped. The cases were stocked. The coffee urn needed filling. The stripe of light would come through the east window at 7:23. Ida McAllister would come in Friday for her rolls, punctual as always. Caleb would come in at 7, as he had come in at 7 for 7 weeks, and she would put the coffee in front of him without being asked, and they would work in the parallel silence that had become one of the most reliable things she had. All of it was going to happen. She was going to be there for all of it. She looked at the pool of light and thought, I am 19 years old. I have flour on my knuckles. I have 2 notebooks and a bakery and a record and a month to count. She thought, that is everything. She went to bed. She slept. Outside, the March night was cold and clear, and the mountains were where they always were, and in the morning she would not be able to see them until the light came. But they would be there, waiting, the way things that are solid and real and permanent wait, without needing you to know they are there, but there regardless. She knew they were there. She always had.